Chapter 478, Gold-Threaded Silkworms Acquiring the Treasure. Han Li didn't immediately take action. Instead, he carefully released his spiritual sense and searched his surroundings. Certain that Zenith Yin and the others weren't spying on him, he no longer hesitated and extended his finger. A blade of azure swordlight extended from its tip. Han Li calmly used the swordlight to carve a fist-sized hole in the stone wall, before willing it away. He then used his other hand to quickly touch the circle, causing a gap to appear in the stone wall. Han Li knew that his time was limited and instantly extended his arm into the hole. The area within wasn't large. After randomly reaching out, he managed to grab onto something. His expression stirred. The item was slender, curved, and soft. After he took it out from the wall, he saw that it was an aged yellow scroll. Just about as Han Li was about to open it with amazement, his expression suddenly changed, and he quickly placed the scroll in his robes. His body blurred as he placed his back against the hole in the wall, pretending to rest against it. Just as Han Li finished his movements, he heard Zenith Yin's gloomy voice. "Han Li, return to us quickly. We are about to enter." Having heard that, Han Li's astonishment flickered from his eyes. Weren't they to rest for the time being? Why the sudden change of mind? Could it be the three old devils became aware of something amiss? After Han Li felt Zenith Yin's spiritual sense disappeared from his surroundings, he immediately turned around and repaired the stone hole. He then walked back to the front of the stone platform. When he arrived at the front, the old devils were standing in front of the steps, looking upwards with a grave expression. Standing behind them, Wu Chu and the Bone Sage were mimicking them. Han Li astonishedly followed their gaze up the stairs. He could only see blue light up above, twinkling with blinding intensity. Several threads of gold light flashed out from a flicker of blue light. In a short moment, those threads became several inches thicker. But because of the separation of the white light barrier, Han Li was unable to feel anything strange. Zenith Yin nodded when he saw Han Li arrived. He turned his head to Man Huzi and said, "Brother Man, my junior disciple has arrived. Let us go up." I hadn't expected that Wan Tianming's gold-threaded silkworm could actually rock the heaven-void cauldron. Although I don't know how this happened, it would be best for us to go see. Man Huzi replied by wordlessly approaching the stairs. Zenith Yin and the others closely followed after him. Boom! Man Huzi endowed his fist in devilish arts and fiercely bashed the light barrier, blowing open a 10-meter large hole. Man Huzi took the lead. Zenith Yin and Layman Qing Yi surrounded Han Li and forced him to walk between them. The Bone Sage and Wu Chu followed them from behind. So cold. Although Han Li had made a few preparations outside the light barrier, Han Li couldn't help but shiver from the surrounding cold. He quickly covered his body in a barrier of light, greatly reducing the chill. Man Huzi didn't wait for the rest of them. He walked straight towards the center of the flourishing blue light with large steps. After Qing Yi and Zenith Yin glanced at each other, they couldn't help but wryly smile as they caught up to him. But before Zenith Yin chased after Man Huzi, he turned to look at Han Li, indicating that he had best hurry. Han Li released a torrent of curses at Zenith Yin in his mind. He knew his place and didn't have any thoughts to flee. He merely wanted to drag along at the back and take a look at the scroll. It could perhaps provide assistance towards his current predicament. However, Zenith Yin's extortion seemed to remind Wu Chu of something. He began to stare at Han Li with absolute focus. The Bone Sage then shot a look of doubt at Han Li. Han Li had no choice but to quicken his steps. But after he walked several steps, his speed slowed down through no intention of his own. Although his light barrier was protecting him from the freezing blue light, Han Li felt a chill pass through his body with each step he took. After only a short moment, his face turned pale white. He quickly closed his mouth, fearing the frost would spread throughout his core. At that moment, Han Li heard Zenith Yin's voice in his ear. "The white rhino emblem doesn't only protect from the heat. It also works against the cold. What are you waiting for?" Han Li came to a sudden realization and hastily brought the item out, hanging it from his waist. Once the white rhino emblem brightly shined with light, he instantly felt warmth surround him. No longer impeded by the cold, Han Li leisurely walked forward and glanced how the others dealt with the cold. Man Huzi and the other nascent soul cultivators only used a light barrier on their bodies and continued without obstruction. As for the Bone Sage, he wore a chain of sparkling red beads and displayed no trace of cold. As for Wu Chu, he had put on a grotesque serpent-scale armband that emitted a pink light barrier around his body. Han Li then turned his gaze to the center of the platform up above. There was a small altar protruding his vision. There were 8 orbs of gold light pulsing above the altar. At the center of the lights, there was a large hole that shined with blinding blue light. Han Li's mind was roused at the sight. He quickly examined the scene. Each of the golden orbs of light contained a meter-long silkworm, with each worm pulling on the thick golden thread they released into the hole. Their bodies swayed as they tugged back as forcefully as they could. Each sway caused the blue light from the hole to wildly flicker. 3 silhouettes were standing to the side of the altar. They were Wan Tianming's party of righteous Tao cultivators. They clearly knew that Man Huzi and the others had arrived, but they completely ignored them. They were only focused on the golden light in front of them, each with a tense expression. A cold glint flickered through Man Huzi's eyes when he saw the scene. He wordlessly raised his hand and shot 2 streaks of golden light towards the righteous Tao cultivators. Glacial Dragon, Phantom Tortoise. Wan Tianming and Tian Wuzi simultaneously shouted as they coldly gazed in the direction of the attack. With a sudden burst of fluctuating sounds, 2 streaks of azure and blue light intercepted the golden lights. Return! Man Huzi was startled by their quick reaction and had 2 streaks of golden light return with a wave of his hand. They landed in his hand as 2 golden knives. The azure and blue lights didn't pursue and instead revolved in place. Their true appearances were revealed to be a 10-meter-long white flood dragon and a bizarre transparent turtle. After Man Huzi clearly saw what those 2 things were, he appeared surprised. The Mad Matron's glacial dragon and Tian Yuanzi's phantom tortoise. Layman Qing Yi blurted this out with a face of astonishment. It was no wonder that Wan Tianming's party was so arrogant. Those 2 old eccentrics had lent them their spirit beasts. From what I know, those 2 old freaks treasure those spirit beasts to the point where they would never leave their side. Just how do they have them in their possession? Zenith Yin spoke with an aghast voice and a resentful expression. Man Huzi replied with a solemn expression. Humph, just look at the borrowers. Wan Tianming is the Mad Matron's blood nephew. Tian Wuzi and Tian Yuanzi are disciples of the same master. There is nothing odd about being lent those 2 spirit beasts. As Layman King Yi worryingly gazed at the white flood dragon and the huge tortoise, he said, "This is going to become troublesome. Those 2 beasts are by no means weak. Even if us 3 were to do our utmost, we would be unable to break away from them for quite some time." Man Huzi wore a sinister grin and said, "Qing Yi, Zenith Yin, have your azure thorn bird and heaven-wide corpse distract them. They might not prove to be an opponent to those beasts, but we need those beasts occupied for a moment if we are to act. We don't even need to defeat Wan Tianming and the others. It will be fine so long as we can kill one of the gold-threaded silkworms." Having heard this, the Zenith Yin and Qing Yi looked at each other in dismay and revealed some hesitation. "Don't worry, I will also send my spirit beast to fight. They should prove to be quite troublesome altogether." Man Huzi glanced at the 2 and wore an expression of slight disdain. With that said, Qing Yi's and Zenith Yin's expressions relaxed, and they agreed. Chapter 479, The Sky Blue Flower. Before Zenith Yin could release his demon corpses or Qing Yi release his spirit beast, an astonishing change had occurred. One of the huge green silkworms in the orbs of light suddenly trembled. The golden light surrounding it quickly dimmed. At nearly the same time, its gold thread was severed with a snap. "Not good," the righteous Tao cultivators to the side shouted out in alarm. But before they could take action, the other gold-threaded silkworms followed suit. Their golden light greatly dimmed, and 2 of the gold threads snapped. Wan Tianming's heart dropped into an abyss. He stood still in a daze. But it still wasn't the end. 3 silkworms remained, and the collapse of half of their companions caused their burden to quickly increase. They cried out as they were dragged towards the hole with immense force. Soon after, the huge clang of something heavy being dropped could be heard. Immediately after, the stone platform trembled for a while after. The blue light coming from the hole immediately dimmed, and the air became significantly warmer. The faces of the righteous Tao cultivators became extremely unsightly. As for the old devils that were about to act, their eyes were uncharacteristically wide open, with their faces wearing expressions of extreme marvel. "Ha ha ha ha," Man Huzi guffawed with delight. Even his yellow beard was wildly shaking. At that moment, Zenith Yin and Qing Yi responded, both basking in schadenfreude, laughing at the righteous Tao cultivators without restraint. At that moment, Wan Tianming's face became ashen. In order to acquire the treasure, he had spent much effort concocting this plan and at great cost. And what did he gain? The ridicule of his devil Tao rivals. This set Wan Tianming's heart aflame. He could no longer restrain himself and suddenly turned to the Devil Dao cultivators with a chilling expression. Zenith Yin's and Qing Yi's laughter halted for a moment. Wan Tianming was a mid-nascent soul cultivator. Even if they were already on opposing sides, the two were unwilling to rashly breed a deep hatred between them. As for Man Husey, despite no longer laughing, he returned the glare with no trace of politeness. What? Sect Master Wan wishes to battle with me. I do wish to experience the true heaven-sifting art's 3 Confucian marvels. After coldly glaring at Man Husey for a moment, Wan Tianming eventually regained his rationality. Go. With a wave of his sleeve, he led the departure from the stone platform, ignoring the remaining gold-threaded silkworms and recalling the white flood dragon from its confrontation against the Devil Dao. With an equivalently unsightly expression, Tian Wuzi recalled the huge tortoise and followed Wan Tianming. As for the old farmer, despite his cold gaze, he followed after them with a far calmer expression. Just as the righteous and Devil Dao brushed past each other, they glanced at each other with extreme vigilance. Despite being extremely domineering, Man Husey fortunately didn't provoke them. He merely sneered at Wan Tianming and the others as they disappeared from the light barrier. Qingyi looked behind them and said, I'll have my azure thorn bird hide at the entrance. If the righteous Dao fellows come back, we will know. Zenith Yin shifted his gaze and sinisterly smiled. Then I will also dispatch 2 heaven-wide corpses to lie in ambush at the entrance. If they attempt to mount a sneak attack, they will be deterred. After Qingyi heard this, his gaze grew blank, and he soon became silent. A moment later, his sleeve trembled and a fist-sized streak of light shot towards the sky. As for Zenith Yin, he tossed something on the floor. 2 puffs of black smoke spread out along with a fishy scent where 2 tall demon corpses emerged. Go, Zenith Yin solemnly pointed towards the entrance. In an instant, the demon corpses blurred and disappeared from sight. The scene caused Han Li's heart to tremble as he recalled the demon corpse's strange appearance when it had first appeared before him. He couldn't help but feel fearful towards the demon corpses. Afterwards, Han Li's attention shifted towards the gold-threaded silkworms that were lying down the altar. He couldn't help but curiously walk over to them, but after taking only a few steps, he stopped. Someone had already quickly arrived in front of them. Han Li was astonished to discover this person to be the Bone Sage. Man Husey walked over and asked, What's this about? The gold-threaded silkworm could be considered a rare exotic insect. From their previous golden light, their abilities should be quite formidable. It is quite strange of Wan Tianming to abandon them without care. After examining the gold-threaded silkworm for a moment, the Bone Sage calmly answered. They had consumed the sky-blue flower to forcefully raise their capabilities so that they might have a better chance at acquiring the heaven-void cauldron. But after consuming it, the gold-threaded silkworm could be considered to be completely crippled. I had originally thought the gold-threaded silkworms couldn't acquire the heaven-void cauldron, but to use the sky-blue flower, he ended up losing everything from trying to gain an advantage. Man Husey couldn't help but laugh in response to the Bone Sage's words. Zenith Yin walked over with his hands behind his back. Sky-blue flower. I didn't think that Wan Tianming could actually find it. I had thought of using such a method before, but I was unable to find the flower after so many years of searching. For Brother Mans Jr. to know of such a flower, he must be a renowned character. Perhaps I've heard this junior's name before. After he changed the subject, he stared at the Bone Sage's face. The Bone Sage softly spoke with a smile. My name is not renowned. I am merely someone who spent too much time reading books. Senior Wu jests. Is that so? Zenith Yin said with an indifferent expression. It was unknown whether his suspicions had been exhausted or if he was fearful of repercussion from Man Husey, but Zenith Yin gave up his questioning and turned towards the large hole and peered within. The blue light from the hole reflected off his face, making for a weird sight. Han Li indifferently watched from the side, but in his mind, he felt slight admiration at the Bone Sage's patience. Old Devil Bone Sage's temperament must be quite fearsome indeed for him to so calmly address his enemy as senior. Nevertheless, there was no one here that was fooled, except for perhaps Wu Chu. Each of them were sly foxes that had lived for over several hundred years. They were devious to an extreme. Just as Han Li gloomily thought this, he heard Qingyi say, Since these gold-threaded silkworms are useless, let's exterminate them and remove their irksome presence from our eyes. Qingyi then flipped his wrinkled palm, and a ball of blinding azure light appeared in his hands. After Han Li's gaze swept past the 3 huge silkworms, his heart stirred. He spoke to the old man, Wait, This junior is interested in these gold-threaded silkworms. Please give them to him." The old man's face revealed both surprise and doubt. Han Li then smiled and cupped his hands, saying, "This one has always been interested in exotic insects. Since they're still alive, this one wishes to research them for some time. This one hopes Senior will allow this." Having heard Han Li, Qingyi didn't immediately reply. Instead, he examined Han Li with a pensive expression. Han Li felt his heart on edge. He didn't know what intentions Qingyi held. Qingyi shook his head and spoke lamentably. "Sigh, this old man was also rogue cultivator. I naturally know that core formation rogue cultivators aren't comparable to their peers from great sects, how they are truly pressed for resources. Fine, since young friend Han wants this rubbish, take it." It was clear that he had misunderstood. Han Li inwardly rolled his eyes, but he took advantage of the situation and wore an embarrassed expression as he repeatedly expressed his thanks. Afterwards, he reached for an empty spirit beast pouch and stored the 3 gold-threaded silkworms within it. It appeared as though that at the same time Wan Tianming had discarded them, he had also erased his marks of ownership from them. As such, they entered Han Li's pouch without a trace of resistance. After staring into the hole for a moment more with fervent eyes, Zenith Yin shouted at Han Li without turning his head, "Han Li, stop wasting your time on these useless matters. Quickly take out your blooded spiders. I want to see what grade the spirit beasts are. When the time comes, I will provide some assistance with my flame python. We must succeed in one attempt." Han Li inwardly frowned and walked forward. Layman Qing Yi and Man Huzi happened to glance at Han Li after hearing Zenith Yin. "Be at ease, so long as you acquire the Heaven Void Cauldron, your master won't treat you unfairly." Zenith Yin turned around and spoke to Han Li with a kindly face, fearing that Han Li wouldn't attempt his best. But when Han Li heard those words, he felt a fierce chill run down his spine. Chapter 480, Seizing the Treasure. No trace of Han Li's feelings were betrayed on his face. Instead, he approached the hole and took a deep glance. Han Li was astonished by the sight. The hole wasn't as amazingly deep as he had imagined. It only dropped to about 100 meters. With his abilities as a core formation cultivator, he could clearly see a flourishing ball of blinding blue flame. A black object could faintly be seen through the flickers of the blue flame. It seemed that this was the famous Heaven Void Cauldron. But when he leaned over the hole, he felt a bone-piercing cold spread throughout him. Even the white rhino emblem was unable to block most of the cold. He feared if he looked any longer, he would freeze over. The brilliant blue flame at the bottom of the hole was actually releasing such a fantastical cold. But after glancing at the blue flames for only a few moments more, his head started to spin. Aghast, he quickly turned his gaze away and collected himself. As Zenith Yin stood by Han Li's side, he stared at the hole and slowly said, "How was it?" "That was the celestial ice flame, a flame that roars with a cold beyond freezing. Let alone core formation cultivators, even us nascent soul cultivators don't dare to touch it. Even the slightest burn by the fire would cause a nascent soul cultivator to easily perish by refinement. It is said that this flame isn't something that came from this world, and it is unknown how the ancient cultivators found such a thing. Even nascent soul cultivators would be refined." Han Li's breath grew cold when he heard this, but soon after, his expression returned to normal. If it weren't for this flame, then the Heaven Void Cauldron would have been seized long ago. Although the celestial ice flame is extremely deadly to us cultivators, there are a few things that are resistant to it. For example, the gold thread from the gold-threaded silkworm, and the spider thread of the blooded spider, along with unusual exceptions such as my 2 fire pythons. "It's about time for you to take out your blooded spider. Let us take a look at it." Zenith Yin gave an order with an assertive tone. With Man Huzi and Qingyi staring at Han Li from behind Zenith Yin, Han Li didn't delay any further. He clasped his hand on a spirit beast pouch on his waist, causing a streak of white light to fly out and circle around him before landing in front of him. The light disappeared to reveal the blooded spider. When it saw so many strangers in front of it, it bared its fangs, and its eyes were brimming with hostility. Man Huzi and the others didn't mind this in the slightest. They merely glanced at the spirit beast as if they were looking at treasure. Just as Man Huzi glanced at blooded spider, his expression wavered and he said in a tone of amazement, "The blooded spider is quite large. It seemed to be a peak grade 4 demon beast on the verge of breaking through to grade 5. It has a good chance of seizing the treasure." Zenith Yin also stared at the blooded spider with excitement and said, "Hee hee. My junior disciple's blooded spider is inferior in strength to some other antiquity variants, but it is an optimal choice for the purpose of seizing the heaven void cauldron. As acquiring the treasure was no longer a hopeless dream, Qingyi appeared delighted. He said, "It is as Brother Wu says. This spider's grade is far higher than the grade 2 gold-threaded silkworms. Even with just one spider, the odds of success are far greater than theirs." Seeing that there were no problems with the heaven void cauldron, Zenith Yin gave out his orders. "Let us start now. Any delay could bring unexpected events. Han Li, have your spider spit out a net around the heaven void cauldron and have it pull it up. At the same time, I will have my 2 fire pythons assist your blooded spider." Yes, although he felt unwilling, Han Li could only agree. Zenith Yin coldly glanced at Wu Chu and the Bone Sage and ordered, "You two go down below the altar. As the heaven void cauldron grows closer to the surface, the celestial ice fire will as well. You will be unable to withstand it given your cultivation. As for junior disciple Han Li, I will have to trouble brother Qing to protect him." He then turned to Qingyi and smiled. The old man agreed with a chuckle. "Well said. In order to acquire the heaven void cauldron's heaven men pill, I cannot allow young friend Han to fall to any surprises." Wu Chu and the Bone Sage obediently descended from the altar and took several steps back. Han Li inwardly sighed after seeing the covetous gazes of the 3 old devils and issued the command to his blooded spider. It immediately shot out a web of thread into the hole. Having arrived this far, Han Li could only take it a step at a time. He hoped that when he acquired the treasure, Zenith Yin would find it too embarrassing to immediately cut ties with Han Li, giving him a moment of respite. This would hopefully allow enough time for the Bone Sage to deal with Zenith Yin and give Han Li an opportunity to turn his situation around. As for the Heaven Void Cauldron, he didn't particularly care whether or not he could take it out. This was because he knew his situation wouldn't change regardless of success or failure in acquiring the treasure. As Han Li was inwardly planning out his countermeasures, Zenith Yin arrived at the opposite side of the hole from Han Li. He took out a pitch-black spirit beast pouch from his robes and turned the pouch upside down. With a flash of red light, 2 15-meter-long, fire-red pythons appeared on the ground. These 2 fantastical pythons had bright red scales the size of fingernails. Their heads were both imprinted with a wondrous design consisting of talisman characters. Their eyes were sparkling with red light as if they contained blazing flames. After Zenith Yin's fire pythons unfolded themselves from their spiral resting position, he immediately flicked his sleeves at them, shooting 2 black medicinal pills at them. The 2 pythons swiftly caught them in their mouths and swallowed them. "Go," Zenith Yin pointed towards the hole. The 2 fire pythons slowly slivered towards the hole in a lazy manner. When Zenith Yin saw this, he solemnly clutched his hands into an eccentric incantation gesture and mumbled a series of cryptic incantations, resulting in an astonishing scene. The fire python's bright red scales were stained black during the incantation, and they enthusiastically began to follow Zenith Yin's orders. Peng, peng! The 2 fire pythons' tails fiercely stabbed into the ground nearby the hole, cutting about a meter deep. They then dropped their upper halves into the hole and began to stretch out as if they were boneless. Their tails held firm onto the ground. It seemed as if they had turned into 2 black-red ropes. During Han Li's amazement, the ropes twisted for a moment. Zenith Yin appeared delighted by this and clutched his hands. He quickly shouted towards Han Li, "It's ready. They are biting on the heaven void cauldron. Quickly have your spider draw it up. Although the fire pythons have consumed my medicine pills, they cannot withstand the glacial ice flames for long. We must succeed in one go." A trace of malevolence was betrayed on Zenith Yin's face when he said this. Han Li inwardly snorted at the sight. Han Li begrudgingly scorned in his mind. "It seems quite possible I will lose my life if the treasure is successfully seized. Now I am even more willing to allow this to fail." But still, he forced himself to have the blooded spider start pulling up the cauldron. This was because Man Huzi and Qing Yi were eyeing his every move like tigers watching their prey. Were he to purposefully hold back, he wouldn't be able to escape discovery from these 2 old cunning foxes. Under Han Li's begrudging command, the white translucent thread immediate became taut. The blooded spider began to slowly move back. At that same moment, the black-red ropes began to twist and pull back. With a series of dull rumblings, the platform started to sway. Blue light wildly dazzled from the hole, blinding Han Li. He was forced to turn his gaze away. As for the blooded spider, it ignored it and continued to pull with all its strength. Upon seeing this, Qingyi nervously muttered to himself, "Good, the heaven void cauldron is already swaying." It was clear that the Heaven Void Cauldron was extremely heavy. Even with the bludgeoned spider and two fire pythons exerting their full strength, they were only able to cause the Heaven Void Cauldron to repeatedly sway. It seemed it wasn't about to be lifted anytime soon. Zenith Yin didn't reveal the slightest impatience. Instead, he muttered to himself for a moment and puffed out two wisps of black smoke that entered the bodies of the fire pythons. He then turned to Man Husey and quickly said, "Brother Man, I must trouble you to use the berserking technique on the bludgeoned spider. My junior disciple lacks the magic power to fully use this technique." "Leave it to me," Man Husey replied without surprise. It seemed he had already anticipated this. He stared at the bludgeoned spider and muttered quickly. He then opened his mouth, faintly revealing the red light within it. Chapter 481, Return. "Pa!" Man Husey loudly shouted, spitting out a beam of blood-red light towards the bludgeoned spider. With a puff, the beam of light burst on contact, enveloping the spider in a large blood-red mist in an instant. The bludgeoned spider hissed and became frantic as if it had been provoked. When Han Li saw this, his heart flared with anger. Upon hearing its name, Han Li was certain that the berserking technique was a secret devil Dao cultivator technique that carried repercussions. These old devils had used the technique without even telling him or showing any consideration towards the aftereffects the bludgeoned spider would suffer. It seemed they simply didn't view a core formation cultivator to be worth considering. Although Han Li had already anticipated this, he couldn't help but grimace when he was actually treated this way. At the moment, the bludgeoned spider had nearly absorbed the entirety of the blood-red mist. The spider's original sparkling, translucent body had turned completely blood-red, as if it were cut from a single piece of scarlet gemstone. Upon seeing this transformation, he immediately recalled the violet appearance of the bludgeoned spider in the underground cave in the heavenly south region. It had the same color and intensity as the furious bludgeoned spider he had seen back then. When he worriedly scanned its mind, he sensed a crazed violence from it as if it had lost its intelligence. Just as Han Li attempted to forcefully placate it in his fright, Man Husey suddenly roared from his side. "What are you spacing out for? Quickly have your bludgeoned spider start pulling. The duration of the berserking technique is limited." He was fiercely glaring at Han Li. Stifling his anger, Han Li had no choice but to command the bludgeoned spider to resume pulling. Fortunately, the bludgeoned spider still obediently listened to his orders despite entering a berserk state. A blood-red light flickered from its green eyes as its pointed legs frantically scratched the ground before managing to gradually pull up its taut spider thread. A series of even more intense trembles rocked the ground, soon followed by thunderous clangs ringing out from the hole. Man Husey and the others were delighted by these developments. Blinding blue light suddenly bursted from the hole and reached over 30 meters above the altar. Han Li felt his body grow cold for an instant before he grew warm once more. A barrier of brilliant azure light had protected him. Han Li was stunned for a moment before he realized that Qing Yi had enlarged his light barrier by several times and was covering him under its protection. The old man said with a solemn expression, "Be careful. A far harsher current of cold erupts in the instant that the Heaven Void Cauldron is raised. It is unknown just how many treasure-seeking cultivators have pitifully succumbed to the unexpected occurrence." After saying this to Han Li, Qing Yi's gaze rigidly focused on the hole once more. He appeared nervous. When Han Li heard this, his heart was shaken. Just how many had previously attempted to move the cauldron? How was it that they all failed? Although his heart held doubts, Han Li knew that now was not the time to ask these questions. He could only recollect himself and look at how things were developing at the center of the altar. It was obvious by now that the Heaven Void Cauldron was extremely heavy. The full strength of these spirit beasts could only move it a sliver at a time. But even so, the blue light at the center of the altar grew brighter by the second. Let alone Zenith Yin and the others, even Wu Chu and the Bone Sage down below were staring at the scene without blinking. But while Wu Chu had his hands tightened and wore an expression of excitement and greed, the Bone Sage's eyes revealed a complicated expression containing both anticipation and hesitation. There was only silence at the altar apart from the sound produced by the slow and gradual rise of the Heaven Void Cauldron. Everyone was raptly gazing at the hole with held breath. Han Li was the exception. He was worriedly staring at his bludgeoned spider. In the end, he wouldn't have any claim to the Heaven Void Cauldron. What mattered more was the bludgeoned spider he had painstakingly raised. He had made a startling discovery. The original milky white color of the spider thread was now enveloped in a layer of faint blue radiance. Although this change was so faint it could be dismissed as a trick of the eyes, it was undoubtedly a change of its original color. Just as Han Li was mulling over this change, he heard a sudden buzz from behind him. Despite being rather soft, it was particularly noticeable among the silence on the platform. Han Li was initially shocked before he turned his head over with concealed delight. It was the sound of the barrier being torn open at the entrance of the stone steps. Zenith Yin and the others had also clearly heard this sound. With an unsightly expression, Man Husey let out a rain of curses before patting the beast's storage pouch at his waist. A streak of yellow light shot out, revealing a yellow-spotted panther. Not only was its body several times larger than an ordinary panther, but there was also a third eye emerging from the top of its head. A flickering yellow glow could be faintly seen from its third eye. A cold glint flickered from Qing Yi's eyes. He icily said, "Wan Tianming and the others have arrived. My azure thorn bird and fellow Taoist Wu's 2 demon corpses have already perished. They obviously aren't willing to allow us to seize the treasure and are coming back to attack us. We must delay them for as long as possible. The Heaven Void Cauldron is already over halfway out. However, the attractive force on the cauldron will only grow heavier the closer it comes to the surface. It isn't something that can be pulled out in a short amount of time." Zenith Yin's face was icy, but he displayed no sign of panic. It seemed the return of the righteous Tao cultivators was something he had long since anticipated. "It is as Brother Wu says." Qing Yi knew they were on the verge of a great battle and swiftly responded. With a flutter of his sleeves, a large flock of azure spheres rushed out. They were over 100 azure thorn birds. Although these birds were only fist-sized, they had feathers and beaks of razor-sharp steel. They all silently floated above the old man, making for an impressive display. As for Zenith Yin, he had his hands clutched in an incantation gesture. A pitch-black mist began to slowly exude from his body. As this devilish mist drifted through the air, 15 dark green armored demon corpses appeared around him. Man Husey coolly glanced at the 2 other core formation cultivators in silence. Wu Chu hastily took a few steps towards the altar with a restless expression. As for the Bone Sage, his eyes swiveled several times, but he stood completely still. It was unknown what he intended. Seeing that the Bone Sage hadn't moved, Han Li frowned for a moment before immediately relaxing his face. Several streaks of light had arrived before them at an amazing speed, appearing in front of the altar in only a fraction of a second. The light disappeared to reveal the group of 3 righteous Tao cultivators. After Wan Tianming swept his gaze past the blooded spider that was pulling up the Heaven Void Cauldron along with the blue light wildly bursting out of the hole, he calmly said, "Good, very good." The Devil Tao cultivators looked at each other, not knowing what he had meant by his words. Man Husey glared at him and retorted, "Good. I'm obviously feeling quite good, but I'd feel even better if you hadn't come." Wan Tianming indifferently said, "I also didn't want to come, but who would have thought that shortly after I left, this young fellow would take out a long-extinct blooded spider? As such, how could I possibly just walk away?" After he said this, he moved his lips, releasing an odd low-pitched whistle. Man Husey and the others were startled. As they pondered what sinister plot their opponent was up to, Wan Tianming stood in place when there was a sudden flash of white light. Like a bolt of lightning, a blue mouse-like creature scuttled into his hand with amazing speed. At that moment, the sect master of the myriad gates of enlightenment silently glanced at the Devil Tao cultivators with a sneer. A stone-chiefed beast. Upon seeing the beast, Qing Yi couldn't help but shout out its name. "He, had I not left this creature behind to monitor you, how could I have known the right time to come back? This stone-chiefed beast has no particularly remarkable abilities aside from its stealthy stone transformation. Even with your profound abilities, you couldn't have possibly detected this creature. It seems I was correct to leave this contingency measure behind." Wan Tianming gently caressed the stone-chiefed beast in his hand and glanced at the blooded spider a moment more. He leisurely said, "Now, I will give you 2 choices. One is that I will kill the blooded spider and have the Heaven Void Cauldron remain buried. The other is for our 2 sides to evenly split the treasure. This sect master can't possibly allow you Devil Tao cultivators to monopolize the cauldron's treasures." It seemed that Wan Tianming had made plans in advance and didn't fear their refusal. Chapter 482, The Battle Begins. "Split it evenly with you." Zenith Yin frowned as if he were tempted by the thought. In Zenith Yin's eyes, so long as he was able to take the portion from his unnamed disciple, he wouldn't be given too small a share, regardless of how the treasure was split. But before Zenith Yin could further consider the matter, Man Husey insolently laughed as he stood at the very front. Evenly split the heaven-void cauldron. Wan Tianming, you sure can dream. You want to take food out of this lord's mouth. First, let's see just how sharp your claws are. Man Husey then shouted, and the huge panther that was crouching in front of him suddenly stood and roared. The beast's third eye opened, shooting out a yellow beam of light towards Wan Tianming. Animal, you're seeking death, Wan Tianming furiously shouted. He hadn't anticipated that Man Husey would launch an attack without giving his proposal even the slightest consideration. Regardless of how it could be seen, his side currently had the advantage due to the assistance of the glacial flood dragon and the phantom tortoise. Wan Tianming flusteredly responded by shooting out a beam of violet light from his hand to meet the yellow beam. In the instant the beams of light met, a burst of yellow radiance erupted. With a bang, the violet light disappeared without a trace. Instead, a smoking white object fell from the air. Before anyone could clearly see what it had already shattered to pieces. After carefully staring at the pieces, it was apparent that there were pieces of common stone. A majority of the people who saw this were stunned and filled with doubt. When Wan Tianming saw this, his expression changed several times and the spirited look in his eyes disappeared. He shouted with disbelief, "An aberrant technique. Your three-eyed panther is a spirit beast variant." Upon hearing the words spirit beast variant, everyone on both sides appeared shocked. Spirit beast variants and antiquity variants sounded somewhat the same, but the difference was actually as large as heaven and earth. Antiquity variants were remnants of a few uncommon spirit beasts that were left behind from ages long past. Due to changes of appearance and characteristics over the long passage of time, they became an entirely new species that only possessed a few of the characteristics of their predecessors. However, these spirit beasts were extremely rare and difficult to find. As for spirit beast variants, each one is an entirely unique existence. They were spirit beasts that have underwent unpredictable mutations for some unknown reason, resulting in their capabilities being greatly changed. The quality of these variations all differed from one another, but each of these variants all had amazing abilities that exceeded what was capable of common magic techniques. The ability to petrify a majority of magic tools or magic treasures was among the better-known abilities. This ability was quite incisive. If a core formation cultivator were to make use such an ability of their own spirit beast variant, they would be able to cleanly deal with 4 cultivators of their rank in a single breath. As the abilities of these spirit beast variants often caused tremors amidst the scattered star seas, they became collectively known as aberrant techniques, distinguishing them from common magic techniques. Originally, a three-eyed panther was only capable of shooting fire attribute attacks out of its third eye, but now it was capable of shooting out a beam of light that was able to turn magic tools and treasures into stone. This was an ability that only a spirit beast could perform after a mutation. Spirit beast variants were a rare existence that hardly ever occurred. In addition, the variations only appeared in spirit beasts at grade 4 and above. Ever since the existence of spirit beast variants became widely known in the scattered star seas, no more than a dozen had appeared. And among those dozen, less than half of them possessed any particularly destructive abilities. Even worse, spirit beast variants had come increasingly rare. It had been over 1,000 years since the last spirit beast variation had been seen. As such, spirit beast breeders no longer held any hopes that one of their beasts would become a variant. The thought had become nothing more than a fleeting daydream. At that moment, Wan Tianming realized the reason Man Husey had so bluntly refused the offer to split the treasure was because he had this to rely on. His three-eyed panther variant was fearsome enough to even the odds against both their glacial flood dragon and phantom tortoise. Having understood this, Wan Tianming's expression grew solemn, and he turned his gaze towards Zenith Yin and Layman Qingyi. The two revealed both surprise and delight. It was clear that they had already decided to refuse his offer to split the heaven-void cauldron. Wan Tianming guessed correctly. Now that Zenith Yin knew that Man Husey's three-eyed panther was a spirit beast variant, the thought of sharing had been thrown to the back of his head. As for Qingyi, this towering figure of the devil Tao was by no means a true layman of Buddhism. He would naturally be unwilling to split the treasure with the righteous Tao cultivators if he could monopolize it. Zenith Yin meaningfully exchanged a glance with Qingyi before he started to spin in a circle. Countless strands of profound black qi spread out around him. The many heaven-wide corpses around him began to distort and then disappeared without a trace in a flash of black light. Layman Qingyi sent a voice transmission into Han Li's ear, stand a bit farther back and protect your life as best you can. We won't be able to protect you in the coming fight." After this was said, the azure thorn birds above his head received their orders. They released a chilling cry and shot towards the righteous Tao cultivators as a swarm of azure arrows. The old man also threw out another the swarm of birds. Seeing the devil Tao cultivators rush to act, Wan Tianming responded without restraint. Even if Man Hughes's spirit beast variant was somewhat troublesome, he had nothing to fear from it. In the end, a vicious spirit beast variant is no more than a mere beast. Besides, he clearly understood that while this aberrant technique could petrify objects, it didn't have much effect on a cultivator's body. So long as he was somewhat careful and prevented his magic treasures from being struck by the yellow light, the spirit beast could be dealt with. With that thought, Wan Tianming snorted and quickly shouted, "Move." With that said, he released his white glacial flood dragon and struck his palms against his chest, causing a purple flame to wildly erupt from his body. In the next instant, he was enveloped in purple flames and was charging down towards Man Hughesy from the sky. When Tian Wuzi saw this, he quickly called out to the phantom tortoise and struck its shell without any hesitation. An ominous glint suddenly flickered from the huge tortoise's small eyes. It slowly opened its mouth, spouting out a white icy mist in overwhelming quantity, sending a raging snowstorm in the direction of the incoming azure thorn birds. Unwilling to be outmatched, the azure thorn birds opened their sharp beaks in response. Slim streaks of azure flame successively shot out, rapidly merging into a huge beam of azure flame. Both the azure flame and the icy mist scattered upon impact as if they were evenly matched at the moment. The old, dark, and thin farmer's actions were particularly strange. He suddenly flipped his hand in a stiff manner, summoning a glistening emerald willow branch to appear between his fingers. With a slight wave of his branch, circles of countless green phantasms of itself flew off, densely filling up an area of over 40 meters, turning into a sea of verdant green. But with two flickers of black light, two armored demon corpses suddenly appeared among the green light phantasms. The green threads around them tightly bound the several heaven-wide corpses as if the threads were alive. These demon corpses possessed monstrous strength, but in the bindings of the green thread they were powerless. Unable to break free from their bindings, the two corpses howled as they struggled in vain. When Zenith Yin saw this, his face grew icy. In a mere second, he had turned his body into a large black cloud, rapidly shooting towards the sky. As each individual heaven-wide corpse was quite difficult to refine, he was unwilling to abandon them lightly. And since his opponent was obviously using a wood attribute technique, his heaven-wide corpseifier would be doubly effective at half the effort. Seeing that the battle between the nascent soul cultivators was unfolding, Han Li didn't need any further instructions before deciding to take over 10 steps back. Although he clearly understood that even taking 100 steps back wouldn't make a difference, Han Li subconsciously wished to be further away. If the righteous Tao cultivators changed their minds and didn't wish to acquire the Heaven Void Cauldron, they might aim to exterminate the master of the blooded spider. In that case, his death would be certain. He couldn't possibly trust that Man Hughesy and the others would arrive in time to save him. After all, to a nascent soul cultivator, traveling any distance on the stone platform would only take an instant. At this moment, his mind suddenly wandered to the Bone Sage. Zenith Yin was currently tangled up in a fight against the other nascent soul cultivators, providing a good opportunity for the Bone Sage to ambush him. Would he prioritize settling his own score and taking revenge, or would he decide to be patient and refuse to provide aid to the righteous Tao? With that thought, Han Li couldn't help but look in the direction of the Bone Sage who stood below the altar. At that moment, the Bone Sage was expressionlessly watching the battle unfold. His face was completely devoid of any emotion, preventing Han Li from reading him in the slightest. Old fox, Han Li couldn't help but gloomily curse at him in his mind. Chapter 483, Transformed Treasure. Still unsure of the Bone Sage's intentions, Han Li's gaze moved towards his nearby blooded spider. The red light in the spider's body began to shine even more brilliantly, and trembling ever so slightly, it pulled its thread back. In that moment, the milky white spider web sparkled with a faint, yet chilling blue light. The light traveled up the web until it collided with the blooded spider's own red light and immediately dissipated into specks of white light. It couldn't make even the slightest contact with the blooded spider's body. Han Li frowned. There was no doubt this strange light had something to do with the celestial ice flame, nor was it any no wonder why those eccentrics wouldn't dare assist the spirit beast in acquiring the treasure. They were fearful of this blue light. But just as Han Li finished this thought, he heard the sound of Man Huzi laughing as an explosion went off in the sky. The spectacle brought Han Li's attention back to the battle at hand. He watched as Man Huzi's body grew 13 meters in size. The clothes on the upper half of his body disappeared to reveal the densely packed golden scales that lined his body. They radiated brightly to the point where they can't be directly seen. But what was even more strange were the several silver rings of light rotating around his huge body. The silver rings seemed illusionary and fluttered erratically, but they were very much capable of preventing Wan Tianming's purple flame dragons from approaching Man Huzi, always blocking their every advance. Although Man Huzi proclaimed that his heaven-bearing devil arts was ranked first in the scattered star seas, even he was unwilling to foolishly take on Wan Tianming's true flames with this technique alone. In addition to the change from heaven-bearing devil's transformation, Man Huzi was also now wearing a malicious-looking pair of dull, pitch-black gloves that was covered in inch-long needles. Man Huzi brandished his hands and started punching the air, sending out huge golden fists with every strike, all aimed at the huge purple draconic sword that Wan Tianming had summoned earlier. Every strike knocked the huge sword back several. A malicious expression appeared on Wan Tianming's face as he floated in midair nearby. He ordered 2 of his purple flame dragons to fly through the skies and look for a weak point in the silver rings. He hoped to corner Man Huzi in a single move. As for Layman Qing Yi and Tian Wuzi, they were the sort to treasure their lives above all else. They kept a large gap between themselves as they fought. Qing Yi was continuously issuing orders to his azure thorn bird as he attacked with magic treasures, while Tian Wuzi relied on the phantom tortoise and his short, sparkling club to form an impenetrable defense. The two were calmly battling as if they were exchanging pointers. The most lively battle was between Zenith Yin and the dark, skinny old farmer. Their battle took place over a large area where both ghostly wails and phoenix cries interweaved amongst each other. Green silhouettes flickered within a huge vortex of black chi. The only images that could be seen from the outside was the occasional flicker of a heaven-wide corpse or the wild whips of huge green vines skirting the edge of the black mist. As for the heavily valued 3-eyed panther variant, it was currently tangling with the white glacial flood dragon. The dragon was clearly at a disadvantage, the panther's aberrant technique putting heavy pressure upon him. The white, icy mist that it spouted immediately turned into chunks of stone upon contact with the yellow light, leaving the panther completely untouched. However, it was still able to tie down the leopard, preventing it from attacking the 3 Devil Dao cultivators. But under the current circumstances, the dragon wouldn't be able to last for much longer. As Han Li observed the battle, a strange thought popped into his mind. While their battle was quite lively with magic treasures constantly fluttering about and secret techniques being unleashed without restraint, he still felt the absence of the desperate struggle that comes with a battle of life and death. It was as though they were not fighting for their lives, but merely sparring instead. Could it be that all battles between nascent soul cultivators were all like this? After finishing his thought, he took another look at the Bone Sage. The Bone Sage's blank face now had a trace of a sneer, but after sensing Han Li's gaze, his face became blank once more and returned to its normal, unreadable state. Han Li's heart trembled and felt as though he were on the verge of realizing something. But before he could further pursue the thought, a huge explosion erupted from the altar's hole, followed by deafening clangs. Greatly startled, Han Li turned to face the hole, readying his guard. He watched as a pulsating blue light emerged from the hole, before violently exploding into a red flame as the cry of a dragon echoed from within. The fiery light quickly wrapped itself around the altar before stopping in midair and merging into the form of a huge 2-headed wolf. Its entire body was made of blazing flame. The beast took one look at the scene before it immediately fled. Upon seeing this, both sides stopped fighting, dumbfounded. The closest to it, Layman Qing Yi, immediately slapped the top of his head. An azure hand of light shot out from his head, sweeping towards the flame wolf. When Wan Tianming saw this, he anxiously shouted, "Don't you dare! That treasure is mine!" He spun his body, separating himself into 2 identical selves which both flared with purple light as they chased after the huge hand. Having finally collected themselves, the others hastily used their abilities and launched themselves after the wolf, producing a streaks of multicolored lights all focused on a single point. The others were obviously a step behind Qing Yi and Wan Tianming. Qing Yi's large azure hand was not only fast, but it also had a head start. It had arrived at the flame wolf first and was just about to grab it. Everyone was certain that Qingyi would capture it successfully, except for the wolf that was. It rocked its heads back and forth, causing a red and yellow barrier of light to appear and wrap around its body. When the hand collided with the barrier, it was repelled with a muffled bang. At first Qingyi was shocked, but soon a smile had emerged on his face. Just as the azure hand flourished with light and tightened its grip, Wan Tianming's purple light appeared right behind. In that instant, he had quickly changed his target. The streaks of light merged into a purple fire dragon and fiercely attacked the large hand. When layman Qingyi saw this, he inwardly rained curses upon Wan Tianming's treachery. The hand was a profound transformation of his spiritual sense. Though it was an easy ability to use, its power certainly wasn't weak. Even so, he didn't dare take a direct hit from a flame dragon created by the heaven-sifting true arts. Even if he were able to acquire the treasure, his spiritual sense would suffer heavy damage. He couldn't afford to make such a costly trade. With no better option, the azure hand suddenly stopped grabbing at the flame wolf and turned to block Wan Tianming's purple flame dragon, resulting a burst of azure light and purple flames. In that instant, the others had overtaken them. They surrounded the flame wolf, and instead of attacking it, they all began to attack each other. These attacks were far more vicious and ruthless than before. Secret techniques were quickly cast in succession, tangling everyone down and rendering them incapable of paying the flame wolf any heed. The flame wolf, appearing to be quite intelligent, seemed to have realized the fearsomeness of the nascent soul eccentres. It quickly darted out from underneath them and charged in the direction of the three-core formation cultivators. Initially, Han Li was dumbstruck by this, but soon he recollected himself. The two-headed flame wolf was certain to be a transformed treasure of the Heaven Void Cauldron. While he didn't know how it was able to break out before the Heaven Void Cauldron was entirely seized, it was undoubtedly a rare item from its mobile transformation and independent acts of resistance. Upon seeing the treasure wolf charge towards them, Han Li reacted near instantaneously, patting his storage pouch. A white streak of qi suddenly flew out and appeared in his grasp, revealing an ancient flower basket. But before Han Li could act, two huge pythons made of black qi rushed to constrict the flame wolf. They managed to wrap themselves around its body several times, restraining it. Han Li inwardly cursed and glanced at the side to see Wu Chu forming an incantation seal with a proud expression. It seems the huge black pythons were created with the profound yin arts. Han Li exposed slight vexation on his face. He couldn't help but hesitantly consider whether or not he should attack him for the treasure. After all, the treasure hadn't yet been truly acquired. However, this would undoubtedly enrage Grandmaster Zenith Yin, guaranteeing that Han Li would be disposed of after the Heaven Void Cauldron was acquired. It simply wasn't worth the consequences. These thoughts quickly rushed through his mind, but before he could even finish his contemplations, the Bone Sage ruthlessly launched an attack at the flame wolf. A cold glint flickered through the Bone Sage's eyes. He silently opened his mouth and spat out a ray of green light. In an instant, the green light brightly flourished, transforming into a huge emerald green net that ensnared both the black python and the flame wolf. Chapter 484, Battling Over Treasure. Wu Chu hadn't anticipated that the taciturn Bone Sage would silently compete with him for the treasure. With a savage expression, he furiously shouted, "You dare to fight this young island lord over treasure?" The Bone Sage sneered and spoke with unconcealed derision. "Funny, was this treasure created by your clan? Why can't I contend for it?" Wu Chu flew into a fit of rage out of embarrassment, but something soon came to mind and he foully grimaced. Instead of further refuting, he clasped his hand into an incarnation gesture, forcefully causing the black pythons to exert more strength. It seemed Wu Chu understood that since the Bone Sage was being supported by Man Huzi, who Zenith Yin held in fear, he couldn't use his grandfather's status to subdue him. Wu Chu's actions caused the Bone Sage to sneer. Without speaking further, he pointed at the green web, causing its light to brightly flourish as its threads grew thicker and tightened. Wu Chu's and the Bone Sage's techniques had both restrained the wolf, but despite its light barrier having decreased several times in size, it grew increasingly firm and bright. The unscathed flame wolf gazed at the two of them as they remained at a standstill. The nascent soul cultivators that were still fighting in the sky were all caught by surprise. None of them had expected that the treasure would run towards the core formation cultivators. The righteous Tao cultivators grew increasingly anxious and wished to break off from the battle to seize the treasure. However, the eccentrics of the Devil Tao were largely unbothered. Regardless of how you looked at it, their side was going to acquire the treasure. With this in mind, they were happy to tie down the righteous Dao cultivators and allow their juniors to safely secure the treasure. Besides, Man Huzi and Zenith Yin both felt that they had a high chance of acquiring the treasure for themselves. Wu Chu had been given many treasures by Zenith Yin, and he also used the profound Yin devilish art, one of the best cultivation's arts in the scattered star seas. As such, Zenith Yin felt confident that Wu Chu would be able to wrest away the treasure from the Bone Sage, who only appeared to be an early core formation cultivator. Man Huzi, knowing the Bone Sage's true identity, held far more confidence in acquiring it than Zenith Yin did. Qingyi could only look at the circumstances with a trace of sadness. After hesitating for only a moment, he decided to tangle with Tian Wuzi and keep him occupied. At that moment, the sole person near the altar was Han Li, and he didn't feel calm or confident in the slightest. In fact, he felt cold sweat running down his back. He had instinctively taken out the ancient flower basket a moment ago due to the fact it was the most suitable for seizing treasures. But when he saw the Bone Sage move to take the treasure, he instantly recalled something significant. His ancient flower basket treasure was something he had acquired from the ugly man that was watching over the Bone Sage's prison. If he were to take it out, then wouldn't he be informing Zenith Yin that he had released the Bone Sage? This was what had caused Han Li to break out in a cold sweat. Joining the competition to seize the treasure was now the last thing on his mind. Rather, his mind was chaotically filled with all sorts of distracting thoughts, while he did doing his utmost to come up with an appropriate solution to deal with Zenith Yin. But in the next moment, Han Li felt amazed. He had clearly felt Zenith Yin's gaze sweep past the flower basket and not react in the slightest. Han Li suddenly came to a delighted realization. The ancient flower basket wasn't something that Zenith Yin had given to the ugly man. Furthermore, it wasn't something that he even knew the ugly man had possessed. Having come to this conclusion, Han Li felt greatly relieved. Han Li had guessed correctly. That ugly man had stood guard at the Bone Sage's island for a very long time, and had heard of the ancient flower basket during that time, and had left to retrieve it. Although he managed to smoothly acquire the treasure, Han Li's party had already surrounded the Bone Sage's formation, and were just about to destroy it. This frightened the ugly man into a furious rage, but he ultimately ended up dying to Han Li's bamboo cloudswarm swords, allowing Han Li to acquire the flower basket as spoils. Having recovered his calm, Han Li glanced at Wu Chu and the Bone Sage struggling over the fire wolf. He thought to himself, "You're quite in luck, old devil. Had Zenith Yin discovered this matter, I would have dragged you down with me. Don't think that I'll leave you unscathed." Another round of heavy, thunderous clangs rang out from the hole. Having gone through this before, the nascent soul cultivators slowed their hands and glanced at one another. No one knew who moved first as they all blurred and appeared in the direction of the altar's hole. At that moment, the heaven-void cauldron was close to the surface. The nascent soul cultivators were all forced to block the fantastical cold it had released, each making full use of their respective techniques and defensive treasures. While these actions produced flashes of wondrous light, both sides remained cautious as they vigilantly watched one another. At that moment, Zenith Yin was extremely vexed. His original plan had been to fend off the righteous Dao and seize all of the treasures in one go. Then they would split the treasures in agreement. But who could have thought that, as the heaven-void cauldron neared the surface, the ancient treasures would fly out on their own? In this manner, the acquisition of treasure was entirely a matter of skill. After all, regardless of who seizes the treasure, it was impossible to ask them to hand it over to others as they had been acquired through battle. This would render their original agreement on how to split the treasures null and void. Zenith Yin's eyes furiously looked around, wishing to see if there was a way he could acquire more treasures. But just as these thoughts appeared in his mind, a deafening screech was heard, followed by two sounds of rustling wind. A streak of red and a streak of white radiance shot out of the blue flame at the center. The 6 nascent soul cultivators were all quite close to the hole, and they all acted nearly simultaneously, using their secret techniques to fight for control. Wan Tianming was contending for the yellow light against Zenith Yin and Qingyi. As a result, Wan Tianming ordered a purple flame dragon to chase after the yellow light. Simultaneously, he opened his mouth with a strange expression appearing on his face, directly shooting out 2 sparkling purple pearls towards Zenith Yin and Qingyi. True heaven-sifting minds. When Zenith Yin saw the unremarkable pearls, he shouted as if they were vipers. The two didn't dare to use magic treasures to block them. They quickly dodged out of the way, but by then, The purple flame dragon had swallowed the yellow light and was returning to Wan Tianming. Wan Tianming excitedly clasped the yellow light and twisted his hands, revealing the ancient treasure's original appearance, a four-pointed ornament. From the flickering talisman characters that flickered on its surface and its spiritual chi fluctuations, one could tell the treasure was outstanding. As for the two purple beads, they shot about 10 meters away before they softly burst and disappeared without a trace. When Zenith Yin and Xianxia saw this, their complexions turned ashen as they watched Wan Tianming fiddling with the jade ornament. What a truly great sect master of the righteous Tao, to think he would use false minds to deceive us. Zenith Yin uttered each word through gritted teeth. Xianxia's face appeared just as ghastly as he chillingly stared at Wan Tianming. Wan Tianming sneered and returned their insults. Who would have thought that these long-famed cultivators, who even weren't able to see whether or not my true heaven-sifting minds were actually real, would be able to so shamelessly say those things in front of the sect master? Could it be that you didn't know that I would only use the true heaven-sifting minds during a matter of life or death? They're hardly appropriate to use in a fight over treasures. As I must produce them by harming my own cultivation, why would I be so wasteful? But of course, if you two fellow Taoists wish to witness their true might, I am willing to make the exception. Wan Tianming softly clasped his hands. With a flash of purple light, the jade ornament could no longer be seen, instead replaced by a purple pearl that looked exactly the same as the ones from before. Zenith Yin and Xianxia's expressions changed before they glanced at each other with gloomy expressions, as if they were both uncertain of his intentions. At that moment, Man Huzi shrugged off a blow from the dark old farmer and Tian Wuzi with the overbearing defense of his heaven-bearing devil arts and managed to forcefully capture the white light. It was revealed to be a sparkling ancient coin. When Zenith Yin saw this, his face became even more unsightly. Yi, at that moment, Xianxia shouted out as if he were amazed. Zenith Yin couldn't help but turn his gaze over, revealing a similar expression of astonishment. At that very moment, Han Li was below the altar carefully examining a red-yellow Rui scepter in hand. It was finely carved with two lifelike carvings of wolf heads on each end. It seemed that this was the ancient treasure that had transformed into the two-headed flame wolf. Not far from him, Wu Chu and the Bone Sage were impotently gazing at Han Li with resentful expressions. A trace of confusion flickered from Zenith Yin's eyes and he grew silent. He indeed felt quite shocked. The treasure hadn't fallen into the hands of Zenith Yin or Wu Chu, but rather to Han Li, who hadn't displayed the slightest intent to act from the very start. Chapter 485, Freezing Over. As the nascent soul cultivators clashed, Wu Chu and the Bone Sage experienced a great surprise while they suppressed the flame wolf. With a growl, the two heads of the wolf warped together, transforming it into a huge, horned, silver-furred wolf. It then proceeded to lower its head and fiercely shot a burst of silver light from its horn. Although the burst of light was only half a foot long, it released a piercing wail upon leaving the horn. In the blink of an eye, a large hole was now gaping in the body of the black python, and the net had been dissolved. The green net immediately turned into smoke upon touching the silver light and disappeared without a trace. When Wu Chu and Zenith Yin saw this, they were shocked. Wu Chu hastily made an incantation seal and pointed, shooting a black light towards the extinguished black python. The large hole in it immediately started to close while emitting sparks of faint light, stabilizing the python's body. As for the Bone Sage, after a brief moment of astonishment, he stared at the huge silver wolf as if he had thought of something. He hesitated for a moment before opening his mouth with a solemn expression and spat out a dark green knife. The knife was only several inches long and handleless. From a glance at the size of its increasing radiance, one could tell it was abnormal. Han Li's heart stirred and he couldn't help but take another look at the magic treasure. If he wasn't mistaken, the knife was a transformed version of the Bone Sage's gold lightning bamboo arrow. He was merely using a magic technique to conceal its original form. Could it be that the Bone Sage had gone mad? Zenith Yin was in the sky and he still dared to use his magic treasure. Zenith Yin surely must have used this treasure to plot against him long ago. Although the Bone Sage managed to conceal its brilliance, it was unable to escape the notice of Han Li, who had refined his own magic treasure from gold lightning bamboo. It was far too bold of an action. Han Li began to hesitate and had second thoughts. Could it be that the silver wolf is so exceptional that the old devil is willing to take such a huge risk to claim it? In that instant, the huge silver wolf suddenly shrunk in size and turned into a foot-tall miniature in the blink of an eye. Then, with a flash of silver light, it flew towards the altar's hole in a blur, breaking away from Wu Chu and the Bone Sage. When the Bone Sage saw this, he immediately threw out his knife, shooting out a green streak. With a resounding bang, the small knife knocked away the silver wolf, but it didn't receive any damage from the impact. As it just so happened, the silver wolf was knocked in the direction of Han Li. With such a fine gift knocking at his door, Han Li instantly threw any apprehensions he had to the back of his mind and threw his flower basket towards the silver wolf. Fearing that this treasure wouldn't be enough to capture the wolf, Han Li patted his storage pouch with his other hand, tossing the chain of 5 copper bands after the wolf as well. He blew a breath of azure chi onto the chain of copper bands, causing it to flash with rainbow light and disappear without a trace. Soon after, a clear ring suddenly sounded out. Before the silver wolf could dart away again, the 5 copper bands suddenly appeared around its limbs and head. Following several flickers of radiance, it crashed to the ground like a shot bird. As for the flower basket, it had transformed into white mist and was already in pursuit of the wolf. In a second, it had caught up to the wolf and enveloped it. With a whistle from Han Li, it flew back into his hand and returned to its original form. Having just recovered their magic treasures, the Bone Sage and Wu Chu gazed at Han Li in astonishment. Their expressions displayed complete disbelief. Wu Chu was the first to awake and immediately wore a flustered, embarrassed expression. This was far beyond his expectations. He had originally thought that acquiring this ownerless treasure would be an easy matter with his profound yin arts. He hadn't expected that the Bone Sage would contend with him for the treasure before either realized that the treasure itself was quite difficult to capture. Just as he was about to use another magic treasure, the wolf had been easily captured by Han Li, leaving Wu Chu in a hapless state of miserable, impotent fury. The Bone Sage wore an odd expression when he came to his senses. Although he soon returned to being expressionless, Han Li caught a glimpse of anger from his eyes. In addition, the old devil felt somewhat baffled when he saw the copper bands suddenly appear on the silver wolf's body. Han Li didn't have the time to muse over the Bone Sage's expressions. Instead, he excitedly glanced into the flower basket. The copper bands seemed to be the bane of the silver wolf. They tightly restrained it, preventing it from moving in the slightest and binding it so that only its small head could be seen. It appeared rather pitiful. Han Li chucked and lightly rubbed the wolf's head without a second thought. His hand then shined with azure light and completely enveloped it. Soon, the silver wolf's body weakened before it eventually faded away to a jade scepter. Just as Han Li had acquired the scepter with delight, Qing Yi and Zenith Yin looked at the scene with astonishment, having just lost their treasure to Wan Tianming. Zenith Yin inwardly frowned. He couldn't do anything about it now as he was facing such a great adversary as Wan Tianming. Moreover, there was no problem with giving Han Li possession of the treasure for now. After all, how could a junior possibly keep such invaluable ancient treasure that possessed its own illusory body? After this was all over, he would naturally have Han Li sincerely give it to his master. Having settled his thoughts, Zenith Yin turned his attention back to Wan Tianming. The heaven-sifting mine was a nascent soul weapon of rarely seen ferocity. He was forced to be particularly focused when facing it. But unfortunately, no action had been taken in the end. The stone platform suddenly shuddered with astonishing intensity as if it were about to cave in. At that moment, a sliver of blue flame had finally reached beyond the hole. Although only a small bit of the flame was exposed, in that same instant, a magnificent blue light blossomed, permeating throughout the entire stone platform. With the sounds of light crackling, a layer of blue frost also began to quickly spread across the ground. Frightened, Han Li instantly reacted, shooting into the air. The Bone Sage had also acted quickly, flying into the air at nearly the same time as Han Li. However, Wu Chu hesitated for a moment, and in that mere moment, the blue frost had already spread over his feet. The profound yin qi hovering around his body was unable to protect him in the slightest. At that moment, Wu Chu became fearful and promptly wished to fly, but his feet were already frozen to the ground, and the frost continued to spread. Wu Chu yelled in fright as he watched the frost cover his feet and spread up from his lower leg. As Han Li and the Bone Sage watched this from up above, they couldn't help but glance at each other with horror. Just as Wu Chu was about to turn into an ice sculpture by the blue frost, a thin line of black light abruptly shot down from the sky. It struck Wu Chu's body, melting away the blue frost in a blaze of black fire and blue smoke. Wu Chu rejoiced. He hastily flew to the skies with an expression of salvation upon regaining his freedom. At that moment, he heard a cold snort transmitted to his ear followed by an irritated voice. Be careful. Next time I might not have the chance to save you. His survival had been the result of Zenith Yin's actions. He had used his heaven-void corpsifier to save Wu Chu from the sky. At that moment, the eccentrics of both sides stared at the blue flames coming from the hole without blinking. Each of them had varying expressions of interest, greed, and even nervousness. Zenith Yin's recent rescue of Wu Chu had been but a casual action. He hadn't even turned his head when he spoke to him. He simply licked his lips and gazed at the altar's hole with a feverish expression. Rank 1 hidden treasure for countless years in the scattered star seas, the heaven-void cauldron, was about to emerge in the presence of these nascent soul cultivators at that very moment. Even the gloomy Zenith Yin and the other expressionless eccentrics couldn't help but have their attention captured by the emerging blue flames. It was no wonder why Zenith Yin had spoken to Wu Chu with such an irritated tone after he rescued him. As the blooded spider and the fire pythons had been trembling from exhaustion for a while now, the eccentrics watched them from the sky with worry. However, none of them dared to assist the beasts in the slightest, since the whole surroundings had already become a world of blue light. While the red lights emitting from the spirit beasts' bodies were able to repel the chilling light, the eccentrics were both unwilling and incapable of descending to assist the three spirit beasts. As for the core formation cultivators, they had already distanced themselves 100 meters from the hole and were watching the spectacle from a distance. Chapter 486, Incarnation Talisman. At this crucial moment, Man Husey raised his head and studently stared at a certain area. With an icy face, he loudly shouted, "Who is sneaking around over there? How about you get lost?" He then sent a punch that shook his beard, sending out a 3-meter large golden hand to grab at the air. A muffled pang sounded out, revealing a barrier of azure light. The light barrier forcibly stopped the golden hand's approach, but it revealed the white silhouette within. "It's you, Star Palace." Several shouts came from the eccentrics of both the Devil and Righteous Tao, and their expressions vastly changed. Zenith Yin's expression grew unsightly, and he rushed to question them. "Star Palace Enforcement Elder, when did you sneak up on us? Didn't you claim to not intend to enter the inner halls?" The white-clothed elder didn't respond to Zenith Yin and slowly addressed Man Husey instead. "Sigh, my luck is truly bad. I didn't expect that the heaven-void cauldron's emergence would cause such a great disturbance that I would have to use a technique to defend against its icy chi, leaving me to be discovered by Brother Man. It seems fellow Taoist Man possesses the highest cultivation out of all of you." His face remained completely calm for someone that had been lying in concealment. Zenith Yin grew furious, but he didn't dare to rashly act against someone from the Star Palace. As for the righteous Tao cultivators, it seemed they also had their own misgivings. They all stared at the Star Palace elder in a moment of silence. "Wait, isn't there another person? Han Li, be careful, the blooded spider." Ever since the Star Palace elder had appeared, Qing Yi had started muttering to himself. After hearing the Star Palace elder's words, he became extremely suspicious. With some further thought, he suddenly recalled something and hastily shouted. When Han Li heard this from a distance, he was stunned. Before he realized what was going on, 2 streaks of burning white light shot out from the other side of the altar. Each one cut through the air towards Han Li and the blooded spider with a chilling whistle. Afterwards, a white-clothed old man appeared where the attacks had been launched from. Han Li's complexion paled. Fast, too fast. This was the single thought that filled Han Li's mind as he saw the white light flash towards him. He did the only thing he could possibly do in that instant. He raised the jade scepter with both hands and used it to block his chest as best he could. Pang! Han Li felt a huge impact from his hands before nearly losing all sensation. He fell from the sky, completely oblivious apart from a burning sensation from his chest, along with the faint sounds of wind and furious shouting as he fell from the sky. Before Han Li could stop his fall, he felt pain on the back of his body. His body had collapsed upon a barrier of light that was slowly rising. "Yi!" A cry of disbelief came from the Star Palace elder that had attacked him. He felt surprised that he hadn't managed to execute a weakling like Han Li in a single strike. Since his magic treasure, the piercing sun swords, failed to cleave Han Li at such a short distance, Han Li must have been wearing a top-grade protective treasure. However, this was no matter as his other sword had struck true. With that thought, he turned his gaze to the altar. The blooded spider had been cleaved into 2 halves. Its blood flowed into the ground, and the small portion of the revealed celestial ice flame had silently sunk back into the hole. The 2 remaining fire pythons completely lacked the strength to further pull up the heaven-void cauldron. Having seen this, the white-clothed elder was completely satisfied and recalled his two flying swords with a wave of his hand. He then put them away and revealed a strange smile towards the ashen faces of the righteous and devil-down nascent soul cultivators. Because these nascent soul cultivators had their attention drawn to the other Star Palace Elder, they were unable to respond to the sneak attack on Han Li and Bludgeoned Spider. As they had seen the Bludgeoned Spider executed before their very eyes, they each wore an expression of fury and their eyes burned with rage. Manhusi didn't have any qualms against taking action. He loudly rained curses on them and clapped his hand together, causing golden light to burst from his body. Before Manhusi could do anything else, the Star Palace Elder that had earlier attacked started to fade into specks of white light, causing him to disappear without a trace. All that had remained was a faint gold talisman that floated to the floor. A similar scene occurred with the other white-clothed Elder. He faded away into specks of light with a smile on his face, leaving behind a similar golden talisman. Manhusi quickly suppressed the fury on his face and muttered to himself with a flickering expression, "The Star Palace's incarnation talisman. So they flaunted their wealth instead of having their true bodies come. They did this to prevent us from being able to settle our debt with them." As for the others, they each helplessly watched the golden talismans fall to the ground with unsightly expressions before the talismans combusted and turned to ash. In a quiet corner of the 5th floor in the inner halls, two white-clothed were sitting down cross-legged in the dark. Their eyes were closed. One of them slowly spoke with a voice containing slight happiness. "Fortunately, we followed them. Otherwise, the heaven-void cauldron would have fallen into their hands. However, our incarnations had been discovered a bit too early. Else, we could have taken action as they fought over the heaven-void cauldron. They would have been too distracted with one another to prevent us from making off with the treasure." The other old man spoke somewhat gloomily with a tone of slight regret. We had best not be too greedy. It was the optimal opportunity to sabotage the righteous and devilish Dao's attempts to acquire the treasure, and we achieved a decent result. However, we merely delayed the crisis for this occasion. The next opening of Heaven Void Hall will still prove to be a problem." The gloomy voice said without care, "That's not wrong, but we might not be there to see the day. I did wish to see whether or not the Heaven Men pill was as miraculous as they had said, able to make up for the deficiencies of impure spiritual roots or refine new heavenly spiritual roots. It is quite unimaginable." "That is a pity. However, we've nearly reached our end. It would simply be too much of a waste for us to use it." Though funnily enough, it was unknown who said it first, but many nascent soul eccentric had completely taken the rumors to heart. That it was capable of both extending one's life as well as breaking through the bottleneck of the nascent soul stage. If these miracles were true, the arch-saint of the 6 paths as well as the mad matron would have definitely arrived. But unfortunately, the Heaven Men pill is only capable of massively increasing the chances for a core formation cultivator to condense a nascent soul. It's just that refining the pill is truly too difficult. The first voice said with a mocking tone, "Humph, are core formation cultivators capable enough to come here? Besides, those nascent soul cultivators were the same as us. They spent many years cultivating but found themselves unable to advance, and they placed their complete hopes on acquiring the famed Heaven Men pill. That is at least understandable. Were we still young, we would have definitely made every attempt to acquire such a pill. It would even constantly be on our minds." After this was said, the other voice kept silent as if in tacit agreement. "Let us set off. We had best prevent them from trying to find us in their rage. That would prove quite troublesome. They must be absolutely furious." With that said, the darkness became silent once more as if no one had been there. Their guess had not been wrong. The righteous and devilish Dao cultivators were fuming. Their eyes held no spirit and they felt rather depressed. However, they were all the cunning sort and were able to quickly recover their calm. They knew there was no value staying angry over the Star Palace's disruption. Instead, the righteous and devilish Dao floated in the air in confrontation. Han Li was once again ascending as he remained on the light barrier that broke his fall. At that moment, he looking at his hands in horror. They were bloodily crushed, and there was a complete tear between his thumb and forefinger. But his gaze didn't stay there, instead focusing on the jade scepter that he was clenched in the right hand. At that moment, Wan Tianming coughed as if he wanted to say something to the devil Dao cultivators. But at that moment, Zenith Yin's fire pythons were no longer able to endure and had let go with a wail, returning to their original forms. The Heaven Void Cauldron released a hum as it fell. Everyone couldn't help but lower their heads at the scene, even Wan Tianming, who was about to speak. Zenith Yin looked particularly gloomy, and his eyes contained objection. But then something completely unexpected occurred. As the heaven-void cauldron was falling, it had been struck by something, and its hum became a dragon's roar. Then, with a heavy roll of thunder, a fist-sized rainbow ball of light shot out into the air from within the blue flames. Heaven-men Pill. Both the righteous and devil Tao cultivators simultaneously shouted out its name with delighted surprise. Chapter 487. Appearance of a Nascent Soul. Chaos erupted in the sky in response to the appearance of the Heaven-men Pill. Having been on the cusp of making peace with one another just a mere moment ago, everyone immediately turned into streaks of light and shot straight towards the newly emerged ball of rainbow light. But halfway there, their lights became interweaved, rendering them all incapable of advancing even a step forward. For a time, radiance flashed and devilish chi scattered in a far more intense display than before. As for the rainbow ball of light, it was motionlessly floating above the hole as if it waiting for someone to grab it. Everyone had now clearly seen the inch-thick medicine pill revolving inside the rainbow ball of light. Each time the pill turned, the ball of light flickered and contracted, appearing as if it were alive. Upon seeing this, the nascent soul cultivators only became even more fervent. Wu Chu and the Bone Sage were both mesmerized as they watched the battle that had erupted in the sky. Wu Chu suddenly heard Zenith Yin's ice-cold voice in his ear. "Are you an idiot? What are you looking at? Quickly, acquire the Heaven-men pill." After hearing this, Wu Chu shuddered in realization and shot towards the rainbow ball of light as a cloud of black chi. At that moment, the Bone Sage also took action. However, the Heaven-men pill wasn't his target. Instead, his hands blurred, transforming into devilish green pythons as they shot straight for Wu Chu's back. Although the green python's attack was silent, Wu Chu had been vigilant and faintly perceived their approach. In an instant, he hastily turned around to receive the attack in furious alarm. "You're courting death to actually be attacking me." Wu Chu was unable to suppress his rage, causing his profound yin chi to scream out around him and rush towards the Bone Sage. The Bone Sage coldly chuckled and responded by wordlessly sending a cloud of green ghost chi at him in response. "Man Husey, what is your junior doing?" Zenith Yin naturally saw what was happening and furiously yelled at Man Husey. Man Husey launched a golden first towards Wan Tianming before roaring with laughter. "What is he doing? Obviously, he is blocking fellow Taoist Wu from monopolizing the Heaven-men pill. Did you really think because we're fellow devil Tao cultivators that this lord would just give the Heaven-men pill to you?" When Zenith Yin heard this, his face turned white from anger. Man Husey's words had effectively dissolved the alliance between the devil Tao cultivators, leaving the acquisition of the Heaven-men pill up to skill. But such a development had been inevitable from the very beginning of their alliance. The Heaven-void cauldron hadn't been acquired and only one Heaven-men pill had appeared. Naturally, everyone wished to acquire it. Let alone the devil Tao cultivators, even the righteous Tao cultivators had their own sinister plots in mind. Zenith Yin clearly understood that the midst of battle was not the time to be squabbling. He settled his mind and thought about using his heaven-wide corpses to acquire the Heaven-men pill, but the dark-skinned old farmer's techniques were threatening and couldn't be ignored. So long as he released even a single demon corpse, the old farmer would release a green thread as if it had been foreseen and immediately restrained it. They simply wouldn't be able to escape. The situation caused him to clench his teeth with hate towards both the farmer and Man Husey. However, it wasn't Zenith Yin who solely thought this way. Each one of the nascent soul cultivators had similar circumstances and were looking for any way they could escape from the battle and seize the treasure. Unfortunately, all of the old eccentrics present were exceptionally cunning and deceitful. None of them could easily break away from the fray. After all, it was far simpler to tie someone down than to fully escape the battle. As the nascent soul melee was unraveling in the sky, no one was paying any heed to Han Li. Han Li had been greatly surprised when he survived the Star Palace Elder's strike. After all, he had been struck head-on by a nascent soul magic treasure, but when he looked down at his chest, he discovered he had been saved by the Emperor scale plate that Man Husey had lent him. The remnants of his outer clothes had already been burnt black, only to reveal the sparkling silver scales that lay underneath. However, there was a slight dent at the very center of the armor. Han Li rejoiced after seeing this. Fortunately, he had decided to wear the armor as soon as he examined that nothing was wrong with it, as he expected the Heaven-void Hall to be extremely dangerous. As a result, his life had been saved. However, Han Li clearly understood that the most significant reason he survived was the red and yellow Jade scepter. Just as he had brought the Jade scepter up to block the attack, he faintly saw a silver wolf head emerge from the scepter and absorb a majority of the blow's force. Otherwise, despite its amazing defensive power, the Emperor's scale plate wouldn't have remained intact. In that case, he would have suffered a heavy injury, even if the attack didn't penetrate the armor. Han Li wished to further examine the true capabilities of the scepter, but now was not a good opportunity. It was only after he put away the scepter that he felt the ferocious pain coming from his palm and web between his thumb and forefinger. Han Li clenched his teeth and his hands flashed with white light, healing his wounds at a speed visible to the eye. At the same time, he vigilantly swept his gaze over the scene and saw the tragic state of his blooded spider's corpse on the altar. A trace of sadness flickered from Han Li's eyes before it was replaced with wide eyes filled with determination. He crawled to the edge of the light barrier that was holding him up and silently flew to the steps. According to his exceptional memory, so long as those mechanical puppets didn't reappear, he should be able to return to the previous floor without much danger. This would be far better than staying in place and leaving himself at the mercy of those old nascent soul devils. After all, Han Li had lost all value to them once his blooded spider had perished. Without any more protective talismans on him, he couldn't possibly entrust his life to the goodwill of those devil Dao cultivators. Han Li's best course of action would be for him to take his life into his own hands. Moreover, the attempt to acquire the Heaven Void Cauldron had failed. Even if those old devils still managed to seize the Heaven Men pill, wouldn't they still have a bellyful of anger? It was certain that he would be the target for them to relieve their frustrations. With that thought, Han Li's movements became even more stealthy. Just as he had silently flown for about 40 meters and was about to prepare for his reckless charge, he suddenly heard a voice say, "Han Li, where are you going?" Although the Bone Sage's voice was calm and soft, it was enough for Zenith Yin and the others to hear clearly. In an instant, Zenith Yin and Man Husey shot an ice-cold glance at Han Li, causing him to stop in place. Damned Bone Sage! Having caught the attention of the Devil Dao cultivators, Han Li didn't have the slightest confidence in escaping them. In the short amount of time he would be slowed down by the light barrier, Zenith Yin alone would be able to kill him several times over. The Bone Sage sneered. He had been using his spiritual sense to monitor Han Li this entire time. Although he had managed to cleanly deal with Wu Chu, he didn't display the slightest intention of acquiring the Heaven Void pill, rendering his intentions unclear. After returning, Han Li shot him a hateful glance, and a trace of suspicion arose in his mind. "Man Husey, if you do not step aside, then don't blame this sect master for using his heaven-sifting minds." Wan Tianming saw that the rainbow ball wasn't far beneath him, but in a mere instant, he had been beaten back by Man Husey's golden fists. Having already suffered this several times, Wan Tianming had finally flown into a rage. Man Husey was somewhat startled by this, but he soon sneered and casually said, "The heaven-sifting mine. Zenith Yin and Qing Yi might be afraid of it, but this mighty lord wishes to see its power. I'm afraid I must request for fellow Taoist Wan to broaden my perspective." It was clear that he didn't believe Wan Tianming was actually going to use the treasure. With a pale, ashen face, Wan Tianming clenched his teeth in anger, saying, "Good, good. Man Husey, you forced this sect master to allow you to witness the true ferocity of the heaven-sifting mine." After that was said, he slapped the top of his head without further hesitation. A resounding cry sounded out, followed by a purple light that shot from the top of his head. It stopped about a meter above his head and revealed itself to be a 2-inch tall naked infant. Purple light wound around its body, and its skin appeared soft and delicate. But what was more shocking was that its face was entirely the same as Wan Tianming, and that it held a sparkling purple ball in its hand. Man Husey's careless expression underwent a massive change. With a spirited gaze, he imposingly said, "Nascent soul manifestation. Wan Tianming, do you truly wish for your soul to be exterminated? My lifespan has already nearly reached its end. What difference does it make whether or not I die a bit sooner if I cannot acquire the Heavenment pill? At worst, I'll have fellow Taoist man assist in sending me off onto the path of a warrior's reincarnation." After those vague words were said, his nascent soul became exasperated as if it had been strenuous for him to speak. At the same time that Wan Tianming's nascent soul appeared, his physical body had closed its eyes and become completely motionless as if it had become unconscious. Chapter 488, Battle for the Medicine Pill. "Humph, reincarnation. You sure can dream. You're not afraid that I'll refine your nascent soul. I'll be denying you of your next life." Man Husey icily said as he glared at Juan Tianming's nascent soul. If you truly have the ability, then so be it, I will suffer. But instead of wasting time further deliberating on the matter, wouldn't it be better for fellow Taoist man to receive my heaven-sifting minds first? After the infant spoke, it tossed out 2 balls from its hands. As soon as the purple balls left its hands, they immediately grew several times larger and launched themselves towards Man Husey with an overbearing momentum. Man Husey's eyes widened and his face contorted in anger. He fiercely struck his chest with both hands, causing a divine sound to ring out from his head along with a burst of golden light. A 2-inch-long infant with faintly golden skin, and Man Husey's face appeared above his head. It was slightly larger and more solid than Juan Tianming's nascent soul. However, its eyes were closed, and it held a small azure shield tightly in its hands. The round shield appeared exquisite, and had a radiant soybean-sized stone embedded in its center. Although Man Husey's nascent soul had its eyes closed, it was still aware of the approaching purple ball of light. It lifted the shield in its hands, emitting a light barrier that covered Man Husey's entire body just before the purple balls of light struck his body. The other's nascent soul cultivators were dumbstruck upon seeing both of their nascent souls manifest, as it signified they were now in a battle of life or death. A world-shattering explosion shook the skies, and the light barrier surrounding the stone platform radiated a purple-red light. A 40-meter-wide cloud of lightning suddenly appeared, binding Man Husey at its center. Purple lightning wildly stormed inside the clouds with thunderous bellows and blinding flashes of light intertwined. It was as if divine retribution had come, bringing forth an execution by celestial lightning. The others were thoroughly shocked by the sight. They had long heard of the heaven-sifting mind's ferocity, but this was the first time they had seen it. It was truly fearsome and deserving of its grand reputation. However, their attacks only became more fierce after witnessing the might of the heaven-sifting mind. Without looking at Man Husey, Juan Tianming's nascent soul waved its small hand, summoning a small purple sword. With a flash of purple light, the nascent soul and the small sword disappeared. An instant later, it reappeared 15 meters above the medicine pill. Nascent soul sword flight. The other 4 nascent soul cultivators looked on in shock. It wasn't a trick of their eyes produced by amazing speed, but actual teleportation. Without a fleshly body to tie down the nascent soul, it was capable of extraordinary abilities. However, these sorts of wondrous techniques greatly harmed one's own origin chi. Although all nascent soul cultivators knew these techniques, none were willing to lightly make use of them. But now, much to everyone's astonishment, Juan Tianming had used one to great effect. Zenith Yin and Qing Yi simultaneously abandoned their opponents and hastily shot towards the Heaven Men Pill. As for their opponents, Tian Wuzi and the old farmer, after glancing at each other, they merely cast a few magic techniques after them in a token show of effort, not making much of an attempt to block them. As such, Zenith Yin and Qing Yi were able to easily break free and quickly descended. Juan Tianming's nascent soul didn't turn its head around, but it was still able to see what was happening behind it. An unsuitable sneer appeared on the infant's face. At his current distance, the Heaven Men Pill was practically his. What could they do now to block him? As expected, Juan Tianming's nascent soul flickered several times, appearing closer to the rainbow ball of light with each appearance. A large purple hand then appeared out of the air and grabbed the rainbow ball into its hand. The ball of light disappeared as soon as it had been grasped by the hand, leaving behind only the rainbow pill. Juan Tianming went rapt with delight as Zenith Yin and Qing Yi soon appeared behind him. They couldn't possibly allow Juan Tianming to succeed. Zenith Yin furiously growled, "Juan Tianming, let go of the pill." A large cloud of profound devilish qi then enveloped Juan Tianming's nascent soul, along with countless azure threads of light that tightly wove around it. "Are you truly capable of restraining me?" the nascent soul scoffed, and with a flash of violet light, it disappeared from the black fog and azure light surrounding it. It reappeared 40 meters away on the small purple sword with a mocking expression. But as soon as the mocking smile appeared on his face, it was immediately replaced with fear. It suddenly turned its attention to the sky above in disbelief. What it saw caused the infant's face to grow incredibly pale. Above him in the sky, Juan Tianming's fleshly body was in the grasp of a lofty figure surrounded in sparkling golden light. Who else could it be aside from Man Husey? But now Man Husey's hair was completely curled and his clothes were in tatters, making for quite a wretched appearance. Still, the gold scales surrounding his body and his fiendish expression gave him a resemblance similar to that of a malevolent god. Impossible, How were you able to escape? Wan Tianming hastily looked at the lightning storm in disbelief, but his fears were only solidified. The domineering storm of purple lightning had disappeared, leaving behind only a few traces of static. Sect Master Wang, it can only be said that your luck was quite poor. In the past, I slaughtered a lightning whale demon beast. Although its body was heavily injured, the lightning absorption pearl inside its body had remained completely intact. Your heaven-sifting mind may be formidable, but with a majority of its strength absorbed by the pearl, it posed little threat to me. Manhusi raised his hand, revealing a gem that flickered with violet light. Then with a wave of his hand, it disappeared. Now this great lord is going to count to 3. If you do not throw the heaven men pill to me, I will destroy your physical body. You should know what happens afterwards. Manhusi didn't give Wan Tianming any leeway or time to consider. With one hand carrying Wan Tianming's body and the other grasping the skull, he started counting. His hands began to shine with brilliant golden light. Wan Tianming bitterly clenched his teeth. He had clearly placed several restrictions down on his fleshly body before he manifested his nascent soul. But now, his body had fallen into the hands of an enemy that possessed a lightning absorption stone. He could hardly believe it. He didn't have the slightest time to think. If his body were to be destroyed, his nascent soul would surely turn to dust. He had yet to reach the stage where his nascent soul could roam alone. Although a nascent soul cultivator could manifest their nascent soul to perform a few extraordinary techniques, it was rarely done as it would leave their body vulnerable. With the Heavenmen pill in sight, and after having been tied down by Manhusi for so long, Wan Tianming became overwhelmed with impatience and greed, causing him to make such a grave mistake. With Manhusi staunchly refusing to compromise, Wan Tianming felt immense remorse and started to quickly analyze his options. But as soon as Manhusi said, 2, he clenched his teeth and tossed the Heavenmen pill towards Manhusi. Wan Tianming helplessly threw the pill he had acquired from using his nascent soul swordflight, concluding the dramatic development in an instant. Excitement flashed from Manhusi's eyes. After he flew forward and caught the rainbow pill, he ruthlessly threw Wan Tianming's body towards the other side of the light barrier with all his strength. If no one were to intercept it, it would surely be crushed to pulp. When Wan Tianming saw this, he was overwhelmed with fright and shot towards his body without a thought. Fortunately, despite being far away, he was able to intercept it by using the teleportations of his nascent soul swordflight. Manhusi then took advantage of the situation and flew towards the exit in a streak of light. It wasn't that Manhusi didn't want to kill Wan Tianming, but rather, Wan Tianming was the sect master of the 1,000 Gates of Enlightenment. Had he truly killed him, he would become a target of the righteous Tao. There was also the matter of the 1,000 Gates of Enlightenment's mad matron, the #1 figure of the righteous Tao. He wasn't yet her match and was unwilling to be relentlessly hunted down by her. As the main enemy of both the devil and the righteous Tao was still the Star Palace, he naturally only aimed for the medicine pill. Seeing that Manhusi had unexpectedly acquired the Heavenmen pill and was about to escape, Tian Wuxi and the old farmer immediately chased after him. Zenith Yin and Qing Yi had been momentarily stunned by the scene. After glancing at each other, they gave chase, unwilling to accept defeat. But before Zenith Yin gave chase, he turned into a black cloud and arrived above Han Li and Wu Chu. He coldly said, "Wu Chu, stay here with Han Li and don't wander. I will return in a moment. I will lend these 2 demon corpses to you for now." After that was said, 2 heaven-wide corpses appeared at Wu Chu's side, and Zenith Yin blurred through the air with a flicker. As such, the nascent soul cultivators were all chasing Manhusi. Each of them blew a hole through the light barrier at the stairs in wild pursuit of Manhusi. As for Wan Tianming, who had just regained control of his body, he grit his teeth and followed suit. Chapter 489, Killing Wu Chu. During the time when Wan Tianming was acquiring the Heavenmen pill, Wu Chu was being restrained by the Bone Sage. He wasn't so foolish that he could not understand how much stronger the Bone Sage was compared to himself. In addition, it appeared that the Bone Sage held a deep understanding towards the profound yin arts. Each of his strikes had been dissolved with little effort. Although that had frightened Wu Chu, he was now delighted to find the 2 heaven-wide corpses at his side. Each of the demon corpses were no less powerful than a mid-core formation cultivator. Despite the Bone Sage's fearsomeness, even he shouldn't pose much of a threat to him now. Even better, Wu Chu now had the opportunity to teach him a lesson. After the eccentrics left the stone platform, he immediately wore a sinister smile and looked at the Bone Sage with a malicious gaze. After looking at the eccentric's exit at the bottom of the stairs, he turned around to see Wu Chu's malicious expression and the two demon corpses at his side. He calmly smiled and said, "Han Li, this person is Zenith Yin's sole descendant. If I kill him, won't Zenith Yin suffer quite a bit of pain?" Shock momentarily appeared on Han Li's face, but his expression quickly returned to normal. He then indifferently gazed at the bone sage in silence. However, when Wu Chu heard this, he became vigilant and doubtfully glanced at Han Li. At that same time, the two demon corpses at his side had disappeared from sight. Wu Chu harshly said, "Han Li, have you been colluding with him this entire time? That's why he knocked the Jade scepter in your direction earlier. How about you take that treasure out when my esteemed grandfather returns and let him decide who gets to keep it?" Having heard these false charges in an attempt to seize his treasure, Han Li became dumbfounded. It was clear Wu Chu had shed all pretenses of not oppressing him now that he felt Han Li no longer possessed any value. Perhaps Zenith Yin had even given him these orders in secret before his departure. With that thought, the corner of Han Li's mouth twitched. The many flying swords contained in his body throbbed with excitement. But it was the bone sage that was first to act. With a sweep of his hand, a green snake shot out from his cuff towards an empty location, resulting in a dull bang. Soon after, a green silhouette was revealed. The bone sage smirked and spoke disdainfully. "Heaven-wide corpse demon, figures that Zenith Yin had refined so many of them." The bone sage then quickly pointed at it, causing a green lotus to emerge from its body. The green lotus wildly flourished until the flower petals completely enveloped the demon corpse. Wu Chu was greatly startled and hastily ordered the demon corpse to break free. But for some unknown reason, his connection to the demon corpse had been completely severed, and he could no longer control it. In that moment, his body broke out into a cold sweat. Just as he thought to control his remaining demon corpse, the bone sage's body blurred and suddenly reappeared right before him. A flustered expression of panic arose from Wu Chu's face as he hastily protected his body with a large cloud of profound yin qi. At that same time, a fierce glint flashed from his eyes, and he opened his mouth, spitting out a small black sword that pierced towards the bone sage at a speed faster than lightning. The bone sage's face wore a trace of derision. His fingernails immediately grew several inches long and became razor-sharp, making for a sinister appearance. He then reached out to the small sword and caught it without the slightest resistance. Wu Chu's complexion became deathly pale from disbelief. He quickly ordered the flying sword to return, but the bone sage had already grasped it between his claws with a malicious expression. After many attempts to break free from his grasp, the small sword scattered into black dust. At that same moment, Wu Chu's complexion paled at the destruction of his magic treasure, and he involuntarily spat out a mist of black blood. "Impossible, you!" Wu Chu only had time to incredulously say those few words before the bone sage moved to strike him. His ghostly claw was enveloped with spirals of green qi. No longer capable of further speech, Wu Chu whistled, ordering the entirety of his surrounding profound yin qi to face the strike. At that same moment, his hand reached for the inside of his robes, wanting to take out a treasure. A strange scene occurred. With a flash of black-green light, the bone sage's ghost claw rapidly turned, and the green qi surrounding it turned pitch black, piercing through the several layers of Wu Chu's profound yin qi as if nothing had been there. Wu Chu lowered his head in terror and saw the ghost claw piercing through his abdomen. Eyes filled with disbelief, he muttered a few words before the bone sage coldly laughed and shot countless streams of green fire from his claw, turning Wu Chu's body into ashes in the blink of an eye, leaving behind a black embroidered scarf, a ring, and a storage pouch. No longer possessing a master, the other heaven-wide demon corpse appeared beside the bone sage in a flash of black light. Its eyes were completely spiritless, and it motionlessly stood in place as if it were now truly dead. After witnessing this sequence of events, Han Li's heart trembled, and a newfound fear towards the old devil had grown within him. It was now clear that he hadn't been lying when he had said that he was well acquainted with the weaknesses of the profound yin art. When Wu Chu had used his profound yin qi to block the attack, it didn't have the slightest effect. But why was it that the bone sage chose this moment to kill Wu Chu? Did he not fear that he would alert Zenith Yin? Could it be that he was forcing him into battle, giving him no choice but to fight against Zenith Yin? Han Li's alarmed mind began to churn. As he did this, he readied the 5 colored copper bands in his hand. If the bone sage made any hostile movements against him, he would have to fight with his life on the line. At that moment, the bone sage had already gathered Wu Chu's spoils and looked at Han Li with a mysterious smile. "What are you doing?" glaring at me like that. Quickly take out your other blooded spider. The others have been drawn away by Man Husey, but we don't know how long it will take for them to return. What could it be that you aren't interested in the treasures of the Heaven Void Cauldron? The Bone Sage's words shocked Han Li and caused Han Li's gaze to wander. He had carefully concealed the existence of his other blooded spider. How could the Bone Sage possibly know about it? He glanced at the corpse of the long-deceased blooded spider. What other blooded spider? My spirit beast has already been slain by the Star Palace Elder. Not knowing how the Bone Sage could possibly know, Han Li was unwilling to acknowledge it. Youngster, I don't have the time to waste on you, so I will tell you the truth. Long ago, I found a pair of blooded spiders and put them into the care of my other traitorous disciple, Zenith Brilliance. I thought to bring the spiders to the Heaven Void Hall and seize the cauldron when they were a higher grade, but I hadn't expected that my disciples would betray me before that happened. Since you had that Jade talisman, I figured that your blooded spider had originated from the Zenith Brilliance's pair. You may not know this, but blooded spiders possess some peculiar characteristics. Although a nest will have many eggs, only 2 of them will survive. These 2 spiders are certain to be a male-female pair. In addition, they can only ascend grades when the male and female spider are together. This was something that I had personally concluded after observing a pair of wild blooded spiders. After all, one must be familiar with a spirit beast's properties if they are to promote its grade. However, this was unknown to Zenith Brilliance. He believed I had acquired both a male and female spider out of pure luck. Since the grade of your spider was so high, you must certainly have another. How about you take it out? The Bone Sage's quick explanation had left Han Li dumbfounded for a moment, as he truly hadn't known any of this. It seemed that the rainbow skeleton from back then had likely been Zenith Brilliance 1. Chapter 270. But how did that fit together with the Emperor of Yue and Zenith Yin Island's cultivation arts? Although Han Li's mind was flooded with doubts, he licked his lips and calmly replied, "That's right, I do have another blooded spider. Why should I help you acquire the Heaven Void Cauldron? Are you willing to give me half of it? Moreover, there will be tremendous, world-shaking tremors as the Heaven Void Cauldron is extracted. Wouldn't this disturbance attract the attention of the other nascent soul cultivators and make them immediately return? That would just quicken our deaths. Also, it was only with the help of the flame pythons that the blooded spider had been able to slowly pull up the cauldron. My remaining blooded spider isn't enough to pull it up." And Li spoke these words with a calm expression. Although he felt immense temptation towards the Heaven Void Cauldron, he stifled the burning excitement in his heart, allowing reason to seep through. He didn't wish to die just because of greed. After a moment of consideration, Han Li decided his best choice was to immediately escape. Without waiting for the Bone Sage's response, Han Li flickered, blurring towards the exit. However, it seemed that the Bone Sage had already predicted what Han Li would do. The next words he uttered caused Han Li to slow to a stop. Chapter 490. The Cauldron's Reappearance. The Bone Sage coldly said, "Youngster Han, don't you wish to condense a nascent soul? The Heaven Men Pill's greatest effect is that it purifies a core formation cultivator's innate spiritual roots, allowing a cultivator to enter the nascent soul stage with greater ease." Han Li was silent for a moment before turning around. He narrowed his eyes and spoke with disbelief. "Purify one's spiritual roots? You must think I am a child. How could there be such a legendary, heaven-defying medicine? It's up to you whether or not you believe it. Do you think that I have lived my many years idly? Back then, I had captured a Star Palace Elder and used soul-searching techniques to acquire this information. The outside rumors that this pill can break through the bottleneck of the nascent soul stage, causes a massive increase of one's magic power, and can lengthen one's life are completely false. It had been proven when a Star Palace Master had personally consumed the Heaven Men pill." Bone Sage calmly continued with a careless expression, "And since you've already acquired the Ninecurl Ginseng, with the complementary effects of the Heaven Men pill, your odds of condensing a nascent soul will reach 40%. If you wait another 300 years to acquire a Heaven Men pill, its effects will be of little use by then. This is due to the long process of spiritual root purification. It will take over 100 years for the effects to be fully displayed." A 40% chance at nascent soul condensation. Han Li felt giddy with excitement. As if having seen through Han Li's thoughts, the Bone Sage smiled and added, "As for your worries that the tremors would be far too noticeable, even if a great catastrophe struck, there would be no way they could possibly know unless they saw it for their own eyes. The barrier completely isolates any disturbances that occur from within. They can't use their spiritual sense to observe what happens in here either. Why else would this Tailstar barrier have been so renowned even in the era of antiquity?" And if you're worried about your single bludgeoned spider being unable to lift the cauldron, don't forget that I am Zenith Yin's master. Even as a demon ghost, I'm still capable of refining corpses. With that said, the bone sage immediately opened his mouth and spat out a fist-sized ball of glimmering light towards the bludgeoned spider's corpse next to the altar. In the blink of an eye, a dense, green mist enveloped the spider corpse that quickly absorbed it. A short moment later, the two halves of the spider began to join together. Green light flashed from the point of incision, and the bludgeoned spider shakily stood up, whole once more. Although Hanley managed to maintain a calm expression as he watched the scene, he was inwardly overwhelmed with shock. The world of cultivation truly had no shortage of extraordinary things. There was even such a technique that can refine a corpse in nearly an instant. The bone sage made the spider corpse walk several steps before he turned to Han Li and confidently said, "My corpse refinement technique is passable, yes. Although the refined spider corpse won't last for long, and it is somewhat weaker than when it was alive, it will have no problem lifting the cauldron with your surviving bludgeoned spider. After we acquire the treasure, I will give you all the Heaven Men pills as I have no need of them. Also, I will cede half of the Heaven Void Cauldron's other treasures to you, but the cauldron is mine. How do you feel about this trade?" "Humph, your words may be extravagantly beautiful, but how do I know you won't immediately attack me after the Heaven Void Cauldron is secure? After all, your cultivation and techniques are both an entire realm above me." When the bone sage heard this, he inwardly rejoiced. Although Han Li's tone was quite harsh, it was clear he was on the cusp of agreeing. Now, it was only a matter of haggling over price. As a result, the bone sage smiled and hastily said, "Han Li, you're being far too humble. If I guessed correctly, if we were to fight to the death, the odds would be 50-50. Moreover, such a battle wouldn't be concluded in a short amount of time, allowing an increased window for the others to return. Do you truly believe me to be so foolish as to bring about both of our deaths? Naturally, so long as you agree to help me acquire the treasure, I will hand over the 9-curl spirit ginseng refinement formula over to you as a token of our sincere cooperation." After this was said, the bone sage flipped his hand and tossed a white jade slip with an ancient aura towards Hanley. Hanalei quickly raised his hand and beckoned to the approaching jade slip. With an azure flash, a ball of azure light enveloped it, quickly bringing it to his palm. The bone sage responded to Han Li's great carefulness with a chuckle and said nothing else. Han Li quickly swept through the contents of the jade slip with his spiritual sense. Although he didn't have enough time to mull over whether or not the pill formula was genuine, it did mention the 9-curl spirit ginseng, as well as 3 supplementary medicinal ingredients Han Li had never heard of before. After some consideration, Han Li bluntly put the jade slip into his storage pouch and raised his head. He calmly gazed at the bone sage and said, "Fine, I will agree to these conditions. Let's immediately start retrieving the cauldron." Since he had agreed to act, Han Li no longer delayed, as it would only allow their enemies more time to return. He quickly pat his spirit beast pouch, causing his other bludgeoned spider to appear with a flash of light. "Very good, you made the right choice." With an expression of excitement, the bone sage approached the hole and ordered the refined spider corpse to spit out a web at the cauldron, finishing his preparations first. Han Li followed suit, calmly ordering his bludgeoned spider to shoot a web at the Heaven Void Cauldron as well. The bone sage cast several magic seals of varying colors at his bludgeoned spider as he gave an explanation. "Let us be quick. We don't have much time. Although I cannot make use of the berserking technique in my current form, I can still use other slightly weaker supplementary techniques." Suddenly, the bludgeoned spider entered a frantic state. Apart from its blood-red shell, distinct black and green radiance were interweaved, making for quite a strange display. Han Li frowned but remained silent. After all, without these supplementary techniques, the bludgeoned spider would be incapable of lifting the Heaven Void Cauldron. With the combined power of the bludgeoned spider and the spider corpse, the cauldron began to rise with violent quakes and flares of blue light. Without the protection of layman Qingyi, Han Li could only rely on himself. He hastily cast a fire attribute barrier around himself and utilized the white rhino emblem to its maximum potential, immersing him in a blistering white light. And for the innermost layer, he released the azure essence sword barrier. A layer of azure radiance appeared close to Han Li's body with faint sparks of gold mixed within. As for the bone sage, green chi violently surged from his body, enveloping him in a dense ghostly barrier. "I can still hold." Although the cold glacial chi filled Han Li with a bone-chilling sensation, The full-strength circulation of the Azure Essence Sword art allowed him to painstakingly avoid being frozen. This allowed Han Li to personally experience the massive gap between the core formation and nascent soul stages. Previously, all it had taken was a casual wave of Qing Yi's hand to produce a barrier that completely shielded him from the cold. Han Li sighed and focused a majority of his attention on the hole. His remaining attention was focused on the Bone Sage. Despite the Bone Sage's extravagant words, Han Li felt a need to remain vigilant of the old devil. With the strength of the frenzied bludgeoned spider, the heaven-void cauldron began to slowly rise once more. But for some unknown reason, Han Li felt that it was unbearably slow in comparison to the last attempt. It was as if every inch it was raised took an excruciatingly long time, much to Han Li's irritation. If any of the old devils returned to this scene, it would make for a terrible situation. The Bone Sage appeared completely undisturbed, but once the blue light from the hole grew increasingly brilliant, a fervent expression began to appear on his face. As the two stared down, their perception of the passage of time grew even slower with every rise of the heaven-void cauldron. While it was still unknown where the nascent soul eccentrics had wandered off to, their absence inspired both fear and delight in Han Li's mind. Suddenly, Han Li and the Bone Sage both shot to the sky as the blue flames had reached the top of the hole. Huge blue flames had blossomed yet again and immersed the world in blue frost. As Han Li stared at the vague shadow contained inside the icy flames, he could hear his own heart thumping in anticipation. The last time the cauldron had appeared, he had been entirely focused on the old devils and hadn't examined the cauldron in the slightest. Now, he had the opportunity to witness its true appearance with his own eyes. Although only some of it was exposed, Han Li was still able to make it out. Chapter 491, Acquiring the Cauldron. The heaven-void cauldron had a flat bottom, 2 handles and 3 legs. At over 1 meter tall and 3 meters wide, it couldn't be considered very large. It had a slightly protruding lid covered in carvings of beasts and insects along with various landscapes. Although they appeared rough and crude, they were true to life and exuded an aura of untamed antiquity. Just as the cauldron emerged from the hole, a faint hum was heard that gradually became louder. At the same time, the blue flames surrounding the cauldron flared before swelling to several times their original size. Having originally been standing near the hole, Han Li and the Bone Sage revealed expressions of shock at nearly the same time and increased their distance from the altar. The entire area within 30 meters of the altar glowed with faint blue light and was completely frozen over. Apart from the minor flickering of the blue flames at the hole and the movements of the blood-red spiders, everything had been encased in blue ice. Had Han Li and the Bone Sage been slower, they would have undoubtedly been frozen as well. At that moment, the entire altar was covered in a dome of blue crystal. Han Li couldn't help but betray his shock upon seeing this astonishing scene and asked, "How are we supposed to get the treasure out of that?" Han Li gazed at the marvelous frozen scene without any idea of where to begin. The Bone Sage stared at the celestial ice flames with a solemn expression and said, "It's not a problem. I have a way of restraining the celestial ice flames. My profound soul ghost flames are also cold by nature. Although it is in no way its equal, I will be able to break through the crystal and separate the flames from the cauldron. In that moment, you will take the cauldron out of the hole." Although his voice sounded cold, Han Li was able to make out a trace of excitement. Han Li was shocked. The Bone Sage took the initiative to deal with the extremely dangerous blue flames and wanted him to extract the cauldron. As this was truly unexpected, he couldn't help but look at the Bone Sage with an odd expression. Han Li absolutely didn't believe that the old devil was doing this out of kindness. However, this method didn't seem to have any faults. Could it be that it was more dangerous to acquire the heaven-void cauldron? Suspicions began to surge through Han Li's mind. Naturally, Han Li would definitely have refused if the Bone Sage proposed that Han Li would deal with the ice flame, and he would acquire the treasure. With that thought, Han Li could only agree. He couldn't shrink back now, so his only option was to move forward with discretion. If anything went amiss while acquiring the cauldron, he would naturally choose to save his own life over acquiring the treasure. Having come to this decision, Han Li casually nodded towards the Bone Sage in agreement. The Bone Sage responded with a pleased smile. He then glanced at the ice flames several times with an odd expression before his body began to revolve in the air. Ghostly chi began to spiral around his body, creating a 3-meter-wide dark green tornado. The air surrounding him became a dense mist that intermittently released faint ghostly wails. The whirlwind then dropped down towards the blue flames. A huge rumble erupted as the whirlwind dropped down, igniting into a torrent of flame. The result was a 40-meter-high pillar of red and white flames revolving around a core of dark green flame. It completely lacked any warmth and instead gave off an extremely cold impression. Han Li's eyes widened as he stared at the pillar of fire colliding against the blue frost. In that instant, the three colors of light intertwined into one, producing a harsh sound of scraping metal, causing Han Li to frown. Han Li soon unfurled his frown as the flame pillar managed to forcibly drill a passage straight towards the center of the blue flame. Han Li grew nervous at the sight and quickly linked his consciousness to the blooded spider. So long as the bone sage truly managed to separate the heaven-void cauldron from the celestial ice flames, he would immediately order his blooded spider to exert its strength. Eventually, the bone sage's pillar of fire managed to reach the hole. The flickering, glaring blue flames remained dormant for a short moment before finally erupting. In that instant, the pillar of flame transformed into a huge dark green lotus, wrapping around the heaven-void cauldron. Han Li was shocked at the sight. The first thought that came to his mind was that the bone sage had reneged on their agreement and intended to keep the heaven-void cauldron for himself. With that thought, he immediately prepared the five-colored copper band and became vigilant. However, the following scene caused Han Li to become relieved. Shortly after, the huge lotus became enveloped in blue flames, becoming something like a shell over the heaven-void cauldron. Han Li's heart quickly thumped, and his face flushed with excitement. He sighed in awe of the bone sage's marvelous technique and quickly ordered his blooded spider to exert its strength and lift. With a loud cry, the taut web violently trembled as the blooded spider heaved at the cauldron with all its might, producing an unreal result that was completely unexpected. The cauldron they had assumed was immensely heavy flew to Han Li's side, as if it weighted nothing at all. Han Li was overjoyed at first, but his mind then grew stern. Not daring to be careless, he raised his hands and shot out two mists of light. They suddenly transformed into ropes along the way and wound around the cauldron's two handles. With a heavy pull, the cauldron fell about 10 meters in front of Han Li. Han Li was rather stunned at how easy it had been to acquire the heaven-void cauldron. He faintly felt that the reason why the treasure had been so easily acquired was because it had been separated from the celestial ice flame. However, those thoughts only lasted for a moment before they were tossed to the back of his mind. Han Li then shook the ropes, having them wrap around the cauldron and slowly drag it closer. With a muttered incantation, the ropes quickly faded away and slowly dropped the heaven-void cauldron into his hand. This sequence of events went off alarmingly smoothly without even the slightest mishap. Han Li rubbed his finger against the lid of the cauldron, not daring to believe it. The heaven-void cauldron, known to be the #1 hidden treasure in the scattered star seas, was now in his grasp. Han Li attentively stared at the now fist-sized, miniature cauldron in his hand when a strange thought flickered through his mind. This cauldron can't be a fake, right? At that moment, Han Li's thoughts were interrupted by a howl of mad laughter. Haha, with celestial ice flame, profound soul yin flame, and divine devilbane lightning fused together, I will be able to cultivate the sacred Usra flames from lore. I hadn't guessed incorrectly. Haha. It was clearly the bone sage's voice, but his voice was filled with ecstasy. For some unknown reason, Han Li's heart dropped and his body broke into a chill. He squinted at the small cauldron in his hand and then expressionlessly glanced at the bone sage. What Han Li saw alarmed him. The green lotus had already disappeared. In its place was the bone sage with a foot-wide orb of light in his hand. At first glance, the sphere of light appeared to be dark green, but after further inspection, Han Li discovered a blue flame burning at its center. Although an outer layer of dark green enveloped it, it restlessly flickered from place to place. But even more astonishing were the black sparks of lightning that shot from the orb, producing slight rolls of thunder with each appearance. Han Li's expression changed. Could it be that this had been the bone sage's plan all along? Before Han Li could finish his thoughts and figure out the specifics of what had occurred, the bone sage started slowly walking towards Han Li, stopping when he was about 30 meters away. His gaze fell onto the heaven-void cauldron that Han Li was tightly grasping. With an odd expression in his eyes, he said, "Very good, it seems nothing went wrong with my plan." When Han Li heard this, he snorted and vigilantly watched the bone sage in silence. The bone sage smiled and leisurely said, "It looks like you figured something out. Although I really want to give you an explanation, my time is quite limited and you're going to die soon, so I'll just have to be satisfied with giving you an ignorant death." Han Li's heart trembled. It couldn't be more clear that the Bone Sage wanted to kill him and take the treasure. Disinterested in wasting the time or breath required for any verbal squabbles or nonsensical words, Han Li's expression sank, and he attempted to seize the initiative. He raised his hand and sent out the copper bands that he had already prepared. With a flash of colorful light, they disappeared without a trace, reappearing only a moment later to restrain the Bone Sage's neck and limbs. Well, Chapter 492, Divine Devilbane Lightning versus the Sacred Usra Flame. Restrict. Han Li clutched his hands in an incantation gesture and sent an order to the ancient treasure. The 5 copper bands suddenly tightened and firmly locked onto his limbs. The Bone Sage revealed pain upon the clasp of the ancient treasures, but a derisive expression soon appeared on his face. He. The 5 element bands. Although they're rather famous ancient magic treasure, they're entirely useless on anyone possessing mutated spiritual roots, those possessing far greater cultivation than the wielder or fallen cultivators like me. He then raised his hand without the slightest obstruction and slapped the orb of light in front of him. The orb sparkled and cracked open in a huge burst of fluttering blue flame. A long ribbon of blue flame shot out from the orb and lightly swept past the Bone Sage's limbs and neck, condensing a thick layer of ice on the tightly locked copper bands. Afterwards, the Bone Sage's body underwent a series of inconceivable twists and distortions. With a series of crisp clanks, the frozen copper bands then fell to the ground. Han Li's heart dropped. Without any further thought, he opened his mouth and spat out 9 small azure swords. They merged into one huge sword in the air before ruthlessly cleaving towards the Bone Sage. The Bone Sage's face became stern upon seeing this. He lifted the orb of light in his hands, causing the tear to grow larger, causing it to spurt out a large jet of ice-blue flame. The jet of flame transformed into a 5-clawed dragon of translucent ice, whose entire body shined with a cold blue light. It used its 2 front claws to block the huge azure sword and viciously unleashed a breath of blue flame onto the sword. After only a moment, the huge sword's brilliance greatly dimmed, and a thin layer of transparent frost began to form on the sword's surface, causing the sword's movements to become sluggish. With a roar of thunder, several arcs of golden lightning shot out from the sword, fiercely striking the ice dragon's body. The dragon was knocked back, freeing the huge sword from its constraint for the time being. "You still want to run? Your set of golden lightning bamboo swords shouldn't have much divine devilbane lightning left. Let's see just how many more times you can keep it up." The Bone Sage sinisterly grinned and pointed at the ice dragon, causing it to charge at Han Li's swords once more. Han Li's heart stirred. Although the Bone Sage appeared unworried, Han Li could faintly perceive that the Bone Sage held some fear towards the divine devilbane lightning. Following that line of reasoning, Han Li launched a magic seal towards the huge sword. He then pointed at the sword and ordered it to intensely sway into a blur, forming an identical copy of the huge sword. This was the Azure Essence Sword Art's Sword Phantasm technique. Both of the swords simultaneously released a dense stream of faint gold lightning. One was aimed at the ice dragon with the other targeting the Bone Sage. "Yi!" the Bone Sage cried out in amazement. The Bone Sage was astonished. Not only did Han Li still have the strength to release such strong bolts of devilbane lightning, he was able of creating another huge sword. However, this astonishment only lasted for a moment before disappearing. The Bone Sage then calmly slapped the light orb, spouting out another jet of blue flame. This time, the ice flames wavered several times and transformed into a triangular shield of ice. The blue mist emitted from the surface of the ice shield blocked the dense bolt of devilbane lightning, resulting in a deadlock for a short while. Rather than panic, Han Li rejoiced at the sight. Although the devilbane lightning was unable to restrain the celestial ice flames, glacial chi, it was mutual for the flames as well. The victor of the conflict would be the side that contained the most power. Having thought that, Han Li patted the storage pouch at his waist. A blood-red cloak appeared on his body. Although he hadn't yet reached a state of desperation, he thought it was best to be prepared for any contingencies. Afterwards, Han Li hurriedly clasped his hands together, and his expression became increasingly grave. With rolls of thunder, an orb of faint gold lightning appeared at the center of his hands. Tiny arcs of lightning continuously sparked from its surface. The orb of lightning was only several inches thick, but Han Li didn't stop there. Emitting the hum of electric current, the orb gradually expanded, growing several inches in the blink of an eye. The Bone Sage controlled the celestial ice flame, and planned to attack the two huge azure swords, but his face paled in complete disbelief when he saw Han Li. He could hardly believe what he was seeing. Han Li was still able to produce such a large sphere of lightning. Just how many swords of golden lightning bamboo did he have? Apprehension surged through him. The only reason he had turned hostile was because he believed he would be able to kill Han Li without much effort, given the profound might of his newly acquired celestial ice flames. Although he had yet to refine the ice flames into sacred Usra flames, he was able to barely control it with the use of his profound soul yin flames, along with his own divine devil-bane lightning. The Bone Sage knew that the devil-bane lightning was able to block the glacial chi of the celestial ice flames, and that Han Li possessed the ability to use it. But he hadn't expected that he would be unable to kill Han Li during this time. The Bone Sage assessed that Han Li should have already spent a majority of his divine devil-bane lightning to ward off his earlier ambush during their capture of the Ninkril Ginseng. As a result, Han Li should have been unable to block his celestial ice flames. After all, there wasn't enough gold lightning bamboo in the world to make that many magic treasures out of it. But that was exactly why the Bone Sage felt such disbelief, the quantity of gold lightning bamboo swords that Han Li possessed. Divine Devilbane lightning was something that was sparingly used as it took quite some time to recover. As Han Li shouldn't have had much Devilbane lightning in reserve, the Bone Sage took the opportunity to eliminate him. Although he felt particularly full of loathing towards his traitorous disciple Zenith Yin, his ambition soared after he acquired the celestial ice flame. So long as he refined the sacred Usra flames, it was possible for him to become the hegemon of the scattered star seas. As Devilbane lightning was the bane of ghost Dao cultivators such as himself, Han Li, the possessor of the gold lightning bamboo swords, became his first target of elimination. And later, with the assistance of Man Huzi, the Bone Sage would be able to easily exterminate Zenith Yin. The powerful streams of lightning that Han Li had released from his two swords had already been enough to surprise the Bone Sage. As for the appearance of the large sphere of golden lightning in Han Li's hands, that had left him dumbfounded. This was entirely beyond what he had predicted. A mere early core formation cultivator actually possessed countless gold lightning bamboo treasures in his body. The Bone Sage felt regret, but even stronger sensations of shock and disbelief. Just how many magic treasures of gold lightning bamboo did he actually have? These swirling, inexplicable doubts formed an immense, massive weight upon his heart. As the Bone Sage gazed on in astonishment, the sphere of lightning in Han Li's hands grew to the size of about a meter and now floated a meter above his head. A deafening current of electricity could be heard from it. The Bone Sage regained his bearings, but his face still remained pale. His previous quantity of divine Devilbane lightning was nothing in comparison to this. The Bone Sage furiously gritted his teeth and said, "Good, very good. Although I don't know how you managed to acquire so many gold lightning bamboo magic treasures, you were doomed to become the nemesis of all ghost Dao cultivators the day they came into your possession. Today, I will have you witness the might of the ghost Dao's sacred Usra flames." It was already too late for him to withdraw, so he prepared to combine the three energies to create the legendary sacred Usra flames. He hoped the flame would be able to break through Han Li's divine Devilbane lightning in a single strike and still the disturbance in his heart. Of course, forcefully creating these sacred flames in such a short period of time was extremely dangerous. The possibility of a backlash could occur at any moment, but the Bone Sage currently had no choice. While he had other methods for slowly whittling away at Han Li's divine methods and the ability to use both his techniques and abilities to avoid it, he didn't have the time to use them. That would either allow Han Li to escape or cause enough of a delay for the others to return. As a result, he could only clench his teeth and revolve his hands around the orb of light. Streaks of all sorts of magic seals continuously flew into it. At that moment, the light orb seemed alive. The blue flame at its center started to quickly rotate as the outer shell of profound soul yin flames and black Devilbane lightning revolved in the opposite direction. A short moment later, the entire orb released a blinding radiance. In the following moment, countless gray embers of astonishingly cold flame wildly rushed towards Han Li with overwhelming speed. After a moment of surprise, Han Li's face grew stern. Although he hadn't heard of this sacred Usra flame before, he knew it would be no less powerful than the celestial ice flames. With a grave expression, Han Li ceased pouring more lightning into the huge sphere, and used his fingers to quickly form many incantation gestures as he began to mutter an incantation. The golden ball of lightning began to stretch, transforming into a web of lightning around him. Soon after, the embers of gray flame ruthlessly struck the gold lightning. In that instant, gold light and white flames intertwined, releasing both rolls of thunder and screeching whistles. The Bone Sage's death/expand. Han Li's expression became unsightly. The web of lightning around Han Li had stopped the gray flames for the time being, but it appeared as if there was nothing that the flames couldn't burn. The lightning had already been set aflame, transforming the web of lightning into a cage of gray flame, trapping Han Li within. Now, he couldn't even escape if he wanted to. But what worried Han Li even more was that, as the gray flames burned away at the net of golden lightning, he could slowly feel the lightning contained inside his body slowly withering away. The decaying nature of the flames gave the sacred Azure flames an overwhelming advantage. The Bone Sage deeply sighed in relief and smiled. He felt confident that Han Li had no method of breaking free of the prison of gray flame. Based on the flame's legends, the Bone Sage believed that even a nascent soul cultivator trapped by it would have to greatly damage their origin chi by using a secret technique in order to escape. Once he refined his own Usra flame and restored his nascent soul to the peak of his cultivation, he was convinced that it would be possible for him to rule over half of the scattered star seas. With that thought, the Bone Sage let his imagination run wild. In his eyes, Han Li was already a dead man. The situation was growing increasingly dire. As the golden net of lightning shrank, it eventually arrived on the verge of collapse. In response, Han Li expressionlessly spread out his palms and shot out dense arcs of golden lightning towards the net. The seemingly unending stream of golden lightning from Han Li's palms merged with the net, causing the withering net to immediately flourish brightly once more. Not only was it restored to its original size, but it also began to astonishingly launch an unending storm of lightning against the surrounding gray flames, pushing back the flames with great momentum. The Bone Sage's eyes widened, and he nearly jumped. He now truly understood what it meant for heaven's will to overturn man's. The absurd amount of divine devilbane lightning in Han Li's body was wreaking havoc on the Bone Sage's nerves. Even though the sacred Usra flames were in existence a level above the divine devilbane lightning, there was just far too much lightning. It was uncertain which would win. The Bone Sage glared at Han Li as if he were looking at a monster. Yet again, his mind was plagued by doubts. Just how many gold lightning bamboo magic treasures does Han Li have stored in that small body of his? Was it possible that his supply of devilbane lightning was endless? Just as that thought entered his mind, the Bone Sage fiercely bit down on the tip of his tongue. With sharp pain and the taste of blood, he managed to regain clarity of mind. He lightly shook his head and dismissed such absurd thoughts. Endless amounts of devilbane lightning. That was obviously impossible. He was merely unsure about the quantity of Han Li's lightning. However, the Bone Sage was convinced that with few more bursts of lightning, Han Li was certain to run dry. When that happened, he would be able to easily kill Han Li and take his many gold lightning bamboo magic treasures for himself. With that thought, the Bone Sage roused his spirits and fiercely gazed at Han Li with newfound greed, raising his orb of light above his head. Earlier, the Bone Sage had only refined less than half of his celestial ice flames into Usra flames in order to reduce the odds of backlash. But it appeared that this wouldn't be enough to kill Han Li, as he still had devilbane lightning in reserve. In order to kill Han Li in one move, he would have to refine all of his remaining celestial ice flames. He then nodded his head in approval of his thoughts and formed an incantation gesture once more. The orb of light quickly rotated, glowing once more with dazzling brilliance. When Han Li saw this, his heart broke out into a chill. It was as the Bone Sage had anticipated. Han Li's continuous use of the devilbane lightning had left it on the verge of being exhausted after having dealt with the Bone Sage's celestial ice and sacred Usra flames. Having seen the Bone Sage about to launch another attack with his sacred Usra flames, Han Li pondered whether or not his remaining devilbane lightning would be enough to break himself free. His only option was to break through the cage of flames and flee. After all, no matter how mighty the sacred Usra flames were, their power meant nothing if it couldn't connect. With that thought, Han Li came to a decision. He released the remaining devilbane lightning in a single, instantaneous burst, shooting out 2 arm-thick bolts of lightning from his hands into the net. The gold net of lightning rapidly swayed with muffled rolls of thunder before exploding in a burst of golden brilliance. Countless arcs of golden lightning pushed back the few remaining gray flames far away. At that moment, Han Li's body flickered several times and reappeared about 10 meters away. During that moment, Han Li was filled with apprehension. He feared that if he wasn't careful, he would make contact with a sliver of gray flame, something that would prove to be absolutely deadly. But now that he had made it past the barrier of sacred Usra flames, he used his cloak without the hesitation. With a flash of blood-red light, he started to float off the ground. He had already decided to shoot straight towards the stone stairs and have his cloud swarm bamboo swords break through the barrier, allowing him to make a clean escape. The Bone Sage guessed what Han Li intended and immediately grew anxious. He immediately surged his magic power into the light orb and quickened its transformation. With a huge rumble, the entire light orb was set alight with gray flame as if it were made completely out of sacred Usra flames. But strangely, the center of the orb still had a small ball of blue light. It continuously flickered, appearing quite unstable. The Bone Sage was initially surprised when he saw this, but he didn't take it very seriously. As his current magic power wasn't much, it wasn't particularly alarming if the transformation was incomplete. He was currently focused on Han Li's imminent escape. Nothing he could say would stop him now. The Bone Sage lightly beckoned to the orb of gray flames. The orb of flames lightly trembled several times and started to follow his orders to attack. But a sudden transformation had occurred. The remnant of blue light inside the orb suddenly flickered several times before it ruptured from the center of the orb. The orb suddenly became uneven and distorted, releasing a faint but shrieking whistle from it. The Bone Sage was greatly frightened and hastily attempted to control the orb's distortions. He had long since forgotten that the sacred Usra flames wasn't something that he had truly refined. He was only able to manipulate it through the aid of external forces. Now, having encountered the disturbance of its core rupturing, the flame orb was completely unstable and had gone frantically out of control. His meager magic power didn't have the slightest effect in controlling it. As his head was lined with sweat, the flame orb suddenly dissolved into the colors of white, green, and black, and ruptured above the Bone Sage's head, releasing countless embers of gray flame. The Bone Sage's expression turned bloodlessly pale. He hastily started to turn his body without a thought, forming a vortex of black and green ghost chi towards the embers in an attempt to restrain them. In the following instant, an arrow-like bolt of black lightning shot towards the ruptured orb in an attempt to save the Bone Sage's life. Although the vortex of ghost chi appeared overbearing, they melted away into nothingness upon touching the embers of gray flame to no effect. While the embers did not fall at a fast speed, they were widely spread out over a great distance and drifted from place to place. But he should still be able to run from them, if just barely. When Han Li witnessed this reversal, he immediately changed his mind. He made use of the opportunity to shoot out 10 streaks of azure essence swordlight from his fingertips and blocked the Bone Sage's path of escape. The Bone Sage inwardly cursed with alarm and fury. He was too preoccupied at that moment to dodge. He could only cross his arms in front of him with gritted teeth and emit a thin layer of green chi before charging forwards. Just before a streak of azure light struck him, he shot out a black streak of light from his mouth, his magic treasure, the gold lightning bamboo arrow. After striking the 5th streak of azure light, it was knocked to the side. As for the rest of the sword streaks, the Bone Sage directly received them with his arms. 5 muffled explosions sounded out. The Bone Sage had clearly underestimated the might of Han Li's azure essence swordlight. Although he managed to repel the first 4 streaks of azure swordlight, the last strike had broken through his green chi and struck his true body, pushing him back by several steps. In that moment, the Bone Sage's mind froze in terror. With a face full of panic, he hastily reached to take something out from his robes. But before that happened, a minuscule, faint ember of gray flame had landed on his shoulder. Whoosh! Gray flame wildly ignited. Without even the slightest scream, the Bone Sage's body succumbed to the flames, leaving nothing but drifting ash behind. Of course. Chapter 494, Celestial Ice Pearl. Han Li felt his blood run cold, and his face trembled upon witnessing the ferocity of the Usra flames. After the gray flames incinerated the Bone Sage, they condensed into a delicate ember and flew off. For some unknown reason, the Bone Sage's death had caused a strange transformation in the Usra flames. All of the gray embers simultaneously released a thread of dark green chi along with a spark of black lightning, turning the embers blue in an instant. The embers appeared to have returned to their original form as celestial ice flames. Han Li suddenly felt his surroundings compress, as the air filled with blue glacial qi. The glacial qi started to cover the ground in thin layer of ice, spreading to the rest of the area within the light barrier. Han Li turned pale from fright at the sudden onslaught of cold and wildly poured spiritual power into the white rhino emblem. A scorching white light was emitted that repelled the cold qi, barring it from approaching his body. It seemed the celestial ice flame's true capabilities were only displayed after the bone sage had lost control. In only a short moment, the entire surface of the stone platform had been covered in a sheet of frost. Han Li's barrier of white light barely managed to protect him, but it massively drained his magic power, causing him to bitterly curse. Han Li now understood that the bone sage's celestial ice flames were weakened from either his shallow cultivation or a lack of time to refine them. This would explain why he had only been able to use a fraction of its true power a moment ago. Had the bone sage displayed this fearsome power with his celestial ice flames from the start, he would have been able to kill Han Li several times over without having any need to refine the Usura flames. In addition, it is likely that the true power of the Usura flames hadn't been displayed either. Its power had probably only reached a tenth of its potential. As these domineering thoughts entered his mind, he had nearly deduced the entire truth of the matter. Regardless, he wasn't about to let himself to foolishly meet his end by the masterless celestial ice flames after having put so much effort into eliminating the bone sage. At that moment, he grit his teeth and reached for the spirit beast pouch at his waist. He was going to release the gold-devouring beetles and see whether or not they could increase his odds of survival. The still immature gold-devouring beetles were certain to be unable to resist the fearsome chill, but Han Li didn't have many options left to keep his life. Han Li's palm moved, and just as he was about to open the spirit beast pouch, a sudden change occurred. The floating blue embers throughout the room suddenly flickered several times before releasing a clear ringing sound. They seemed to have received some sort of command and started to shoot towards the sky, condensing into a single solid form. A short moment later, a shining blue light sphere appeared in the sky. As soon as this fist-sized blue ice pearl had appeared, the fantastical chill within the stone platform instantly disappeared as if it had never been there. Having already opened his spirit beast pouch halfway, Han Li was dumbfounded, but he soon found himself overwhelmed with delighted surprise. Regardless of what strange transformations the celestial ice flames underwent, he could now safely make his escape. At that moment, the blue ice pearl slowly floated down from the sky and stopped in front of Han Li. Han Li looked at the ice pearl with a strange expression. After some contemplation, he reached out his hand and shot a bolt of the remnant lightning at it. After winding around the ice pearl for a moment, the pearl had been restrained and obediently entered the lightning's control with no further surprises. Han Li's expression grew solemn. He didn't dare to be overly confident and carefully flicked his wrist, having the golden lightning slowly draw the ice pearl towards him. He had the pearl stop about a foot away from him and looked at it with trepidation. With his hand firmly covered in azure light, he carefully reached out to it. Although his hand was still covered in dense true essence, Han Li could feel a slight chill through it. It seemed that after the celestial ice flames had condensed into this pearl, its glacial qi had been completely sealed. As such, Han Li breathed a sigh of relief and dispersed the light surrounding his hand. He grabbed the pearl with 3 fingers and carefully examined it. The blue pearl's exterior was solid blue crystal, while its interior consisted of raging flames. Han Li hesitated for a moment. This celestial ice pearl was a treasure that had scarcely, if ever, appeared in this world. It could be considered a treasure even more valuable than the heaven-void cauldron. Although he didn't know how this ice-fire pearl could be refined or used, it was something that he absolutely couldn't discard. After having witnessed the viciousness of the Azure Sun Devil Fire One, first and only appearance in Chapter 266, and the heaven-wide corpse fire, Han Li found himself desiring a powerful flame of his own. And even better, the celestial ice flame's power was even greater than the previous flames he had witnessed. With this, he would be able to fulfill his long desire of possessing some truly ferocious flames. Although attempting to use and acquire it possessed a certain degree of danger, Han Li was more than willing to brave the risk. With that thought, Han Li shot out a spark of gold lightning and wrapped the ice pearl in successive layers of lightning. A short moment later, he held the lightning-clad pearl in his hand while sparks of lightning occasionally arced off the ball. The result set Han Li's mind at ease. If the ice pearl was to rupture once more, The cover of Devilbane lightning would be able to buy him enough time to wrest control over it. After having just battled against these very flames, he was completely confident that the divine Devilbane lightning could restrain them if need be. There would be no fear of any sudden backlash. However, he had now truly exhausted the reserve of Devilbane lightning inside his body. Not even a spark remained. However, Han Li couldn't bring himself to care as he put the pearl inside a square jade box and properly placed it away. At that moment, Han Li finally had the chance to take a breath and make a quick flight to the altar. He placed his over-exhausted bludgeoned spider into his spirit beast pouch. As for the refined spider corpse, it had long stopped moving. Han Li couldn't help but stop when he arrived at where the bone sage perished. With an astonished expression, he waved his hand. An item that faintly shone with white light flew into his hand from within the ashes. It turned out to be a flawless white gem that was several inches long. After sizing it up for a moment, he recognized it to be the bone sage's rib bone. Han Li was quite amazed to find that it had been completely unharmed by the sacred Usura flames. When he had first seen it inside the bone sage's prison, the rib bone had contained the map of Heaven Void Hall. Could it be that the rib bone holds other items as well? After some further thought, Han Li placed it into his storage pouch. Now was not the time to examine his spoils, as his escape and survival were the far more urgent matters at hand. Just as Han Li flew towards the steps, he unexpectedly found a dormant emerald green arrow on the ground. Han Li frowned and waved his hand, sweeping the treasure into his grasp with a streak of azure light. After a casual inspection, Han Li placed the arrow into his bag, but a strange ringing then unexpectedly sounded out from within his spirit beast pouch. Han Li's heart stirred, and he couldn't help but be surprised. After frowning with some deliberation, he suddenly slapped his storage pouch. A streak of light circled around him before revealing itself to be the soul-devouring weeping soul beast. Han Li opened his mouth and spat out the gray pearl used to control it, the weeping soul pearl. Han Li had found the circumstances from when Yuan Yao handed this beast over to him to be quite strange. As a result, he hadn't refined the control pearl. However, it was still an easy matter to erase her lingering spiritual sense from the pearl and exert control over the weeping soul beast. As he held onto the weeping soul pearl, he stared at the small emerald green arrow and suddenly opened his mouth. An azure ball of core flame enveloped the arrow and started to slowly refine it. At first, the arrow didn't reveal the slightest reaction, as if it were truly dead. A cold glint then flashed through Han Li's eyes. After licking his lips, he threw the arrow into the air and gave the weeping soul beast a command. The beast suddenly snorted and shot out a yellow mist, enveloping the small arrow. The small arrow had originally stayed still, but upon seeing the yellow mist, it flashed with green light several times, enveloping itself in a streak of green radiance accompanied by a sharp whistle. The arrow then shot directly towards the stone stairs as if it were terrified by the yellow mist. Chapter 495, Mysterious Scroll Painting. Han Li had already been prepared for the arrow to attempt to escape. Within the arrow's first few meters of flight, Han Li shot out an azure sword streak that intercepted it, causing it to tumble. In that opening, the weeping soul beast wrapped the small arrow in a yellow radiance, causing the magic treasure to incessantly flash. The arrow dashed back and forth within the cage of light as if wanting to escape, but the yellow light appeared immensely more powerful than it. No matter how much the arrow struggled, it was unable to escape. This was to be expected of the beast that was known to be the bane of all ghosts. As the small arrow's resistance grew weaker, yellow threads shot out from the cage of light and tightly bound the small arrow in an instant. The yellow threads then grew taut and dragged out a ball of green light from within the small arrow. The green light was ensnared by many yellow threads and incessantly transformed into all sorts of animals and insects, as well as fluctuating in size in its attempt to break free. Despite its efforts, it was unable to escape from the yellow threads and was gradually drawn closer and closer to the weeping soul beast's nose. At that moment, the green light grew panicked and transformed into the face of an old man. The light loudly pleaded towards Han Li. "Young friend Han, I beg you to let me go. So long as you spare my life, I will willingly serve you for the rest of my life. The number of strange and secret techniques I know are countless, and I am willing to give you all of them. Moreover, doesn't young friend Han wish to learn the entirety of the profound yin arts? I didn't even teach the last few layers to my traitorous disciple Zenith Yin. Doesn't fellow Taoist Han also wish to know about the wonders of profound soul demonification? Although my own estate had been seized by Zenith Yin, I still have many secret cave dwellings, each containing their own hidden treasures. This old servant is willing to fully devote himself to you. The more the ghostly face spoke, the quicker the words came out and the more panicked it appeared. He even took the initiative to offer to become a servant because at that moment, he was only about a foot away from the weeping soul beast's nose. If he were to truly be absorbed by the beast, even if his soul were more tenacious, he would never be able to escape. Despite having a will far more staunch and unwavering than others, Han Li's heart thumped upon hearing the Bone Sage's offers, and his face revealed a trace of hesitation. Perhaps due to having seen Han Li's hesitation, the ghost revealed his greatest trump card with a low roar. Even if fellow Taoist Han doesn't want those things, don't you want to know the weaknesses of Zenith Yin's cultivation arts? And how about removing the tracing mark he placed on your body? Han Li's gaze flickered several times and his expression continuously shifted. He sighed and lightly waved his hand, causing the radiance encasing the Bone Sage to grow still, preventing him from continuing towards the weeping soul beast's nose. The thread-bound ghost rejoiced and sighed with relief. "Young friend Han, you are truly wise, by sparing this old man." The ghost face forced a smile and intended to ingratiate himself to Han Li. But when the Bone Sage was about to continue, the weeping soul beast snorted and resumed sucking in the Bone Sage. With his guard now down, he was sucked in without the slightest resistance. At that moment, Han Li wore a cold sneer. The weeping soul beast burped, as if it was quite satisfied with his meal, and clumsily patted its stomach. With a faint smile, Han Li shook the weeping soul pearl in his hand and returned the beast to his storage pouch. Han Li walked forward with the small green arrow now in his grasp. As he gazed at it, he muttered, "You want to be my servant. How could I possibly choose to act against my own interests? You lived for over 1,000 years. It would already be baseless flattery to say that I could possibly stand to outscheme you. Killing you now will save me quite a bit trouble. Who knows when you would betray me?" Even now, Han Li was unable to understand whether the ghost had been the Bone Sage's true soul or a soul shard that he had split off earlier. Han Li wouldn't be surprised if ghost Taoists had such soul-splitting techniques. After Han Li picked up the 5 element bands that were lying nearby and lingered for a moment, the ghost face had reminded him of the marker that Zenith Yin had placed on him. If he didn't figure out how to remove it, he might be detected immediately after he left the barrier. Han Li had already examined himself several times with his spiritual sense, but hadn't been able to find the slightest trace. However, Han Li still had another way to look for any markings. Otherwise, he wouldn't have so rashly exterminated the ghost. Han Li released several thousand gold-devouring beetles into the air and had them crawl all over his body. After a short moment, a few of the gold-devouring beetles on his lower leg released a peculiar shriek. Han Li rejoiced and issued the command. The gold-devouring beetles on his leg became restless for a moment before they all returned to his spirit beast pouch. Han Li then flew towards the stone steps without further delay. He felt that he had tarried for far too long and was on edge with fear. He traveled the 100 meters down the stairs in the blink of an eye. Han Li then opened his mouth and spat out a streak of blue light, cleaving open a 3-meter hole in the light barrier with his bamboo cloudswarm sword. He then shot out of the hole in a streak of light. According to his calculations, his best bet would be to stealthily return to the 1st or 2nd floor and enter one of the doors. Afterwards, he would break the restrictions on the secret room and return to Heaven Void Hall. As for the rooms on the other floors, they were far too dangerous for him. Han Li shot along the path he remembered in complete silence. On his way back, the restrictions and puppets had all been long since eliminated. Apart from being careful about avoiding the old devils, he didn't have any other worries and flew as boldly as he could. Because Han Li could see the path ahead with his spiritual sense, he took out the shabby scroll he had acquired from the hollow wall and decided to use the time to read it. Yeah. After taking several quick glances at it, he couldn't help but yell in shock and slow down, despite having planned to rush through the passageway. The scroll didn't appear exceptional and didn't contain the slightest spiritual power. Rather, the scroll contained a rather crude and simple drawing, depicting a vague map. After Han Li studied it several times, he immediately recognized it to be a map of the 5th floor of the inner halls. Needless to say, there was a drawing of a stone platform along with a cauldron that had 2 handles and 3 legs at the very top. This was clearly a picture of the Heaven Void Cauldron. There was also a crossed marking in front of it that was certain to be indicating a secret room. But what shocked Han Li the most were the passageways that were traced with bright red ink, standing out from the rest of the black ink map. The route led to a picture of a high wall with a transportation formation behind it. According to Han Li's original plan, he would return to the first or second floor and pray that he wouldn't encounter any of the old devils along the way. If this map was accurate, then couldn't he just use the transportation formation it showed to leave this place? Even if it didn't take him outside of the Heaven Void Hall, it would almost certainly be much safer than foolishly forcing his way through the fifth floor. Han Li was more specifically tempted by how close he already was to the marked path. He was only an intersection away from entering the red line path. However, his sole worry was whether or not he would encounter any restrictions or puppets along the way. He had no worries towards the validity of the map. How could it possibly be fake? Not only was it hidden behind a hollow wall, but it seemed to be as old as the Heaven Void Hall itself. Who would spend so much effort just to play a joke? After an extended period of indecision, Han Li arrived at the intersection. He continuously glanced around as he was still unsure of what path to take. Whatever, if I come across any dangers at worst, I'll just return to the previous path. According to the map, the route isn't very long. As such, it should prove much safer than returning to the previous floor. Moreover, he didn't believe that the map would mark out a route for escape that would include many dangers along its path. With that thought, Han Li spread out his arms. Many lights flashed around him to reveal a crowd of huge ape puppets. Under his command, they immediately set forth down the passage as he closely followed after them with a solemn expression. An unfortunate reality. Chapter 496, A Gorgeous Woman and a Spirit Well. Much to Han Li's surprise, the path revealed by the map he found hidden within a wall had been peaceful. He didn't encounter any restrictions or puppets guards as he followed the map, and eventually arrived at the tall wall without any trouble. After looking at this common stone wall, Han Li unfolded the age scroll and carefully examined it once more. This is the place, Han Li muttered to himself with certainty. He emitted streaks of azure swordlight from the fingers of one of his hands and directly walked towards the stone wall. Han Li rejoiced upon seeing there were no restrictions on the wall, and as he had hoped, the wall was hollow. He used his fingers to cut open a 3-meter-wide circle with great ease, and gently pushed it with his other hand, revealing a large hole with a dark interior. The swordlight on his fingers disappeared with a shake of his hand. He then summoned a ball of white light in his palm and had it slowly enter the room. Without any further hesitation, he nimbly leapt in after it. The hidden room was only about 6 meters tall and about 15 meters wide. Although the entire room was covered by a thick layer of dust, there was also a very crude transportation formation at the center of the room. The transportation formation was drawn with crooked lines, and its talisman markings were as crudely drawn as if it were a poor imitation of a formation by an unskilled layman. Han Li wrinkled his brow. Could it be that the formation was incapable of being used or that it had been long since discarded? He took a step forward and inspected the formation using his own knowledge on spell formations. After a short while, he let out a long sigh. Although the formation spell was crude, it could still be used. Furthermore, it didn't seem to be a long-distance transportation formation. It would likely take him to a place that should seem at least somewhat familiar. Han Li took out several spirit stones and quickly placed them on the 4 sides of the formation. After a series of hums, the spell formation shined with faint light. Han Li smiled at the sight. Instead of hastily using the formation, he turned his head to look at the hole in the wall and pondered for a moment. He approached the wall and cast several minor restoration magic techniques, returning the fallen stone to the open wall. In the blink of an eye, the wall had returned to its original appearance. Han Li dusted off his hands and walked into the spell formation before disappearing in a flash of white light. A moment later, Han Li reappeared in a thin mist. The mist was warm and carried a floral scent. About 3 meters ahead of him, there was a milky white pond that spanned over 30 meters. The pond seemed to be the source of the white mist and fragrant odor. What stunned him wasn't that, but the naked woman that was crouched at the pond. She seemed to have been enjoying the water. The amazing sight of her lustrous, flawless body and her long, shiny black hair caused Han Li to unconsciously swallow, putting his mind into a daze. But when he saw her incredulous expression, Han Li bitterly smiled. After bluntly taking a long look at the woman's body with a strange expression, he spoke without the slightest hint of sincerity. "Lady Yuan, what a coincidence. You've also arrived here. However, it seems I've appeared at an unsuitable time." The naked woman in the pond was actually the beauty Yuan Yao that had disappeared into the inner halls. At that moment, Yuan Yao was in shock at Han Li's sudden appearance. When she heard him speak, she suddenly awoke and her face flushed red. She hastily used her hands to cover her ample figure and flusteredly yelled, "How did you get here? The transportation formation shouldn't be in any condition to be used. You, quickly, turn around." Yuan Yao appeared to be both startled and embarrassed. After chuckling, Han Li didn't reply and casually walked back to the transportation formation and examined his surroundings. It was a stone room that spanned over 100 meters and had a stone gate at either end. Alongside the pond across from Han Li, black clothes and several storage pouches lay in a pile at its shore. When Han Li's gaze fell onto the back wall, he spotted a white jade sculpture of a dragon head mounted 10 meters up on the wall. About a meter below the sculpture, there was a recess that shined with green light coming from a jade bottle with a long neck. It appeared to contain something valuable. When Yuan Yao saw that Han Li spotted that jade bottle, she had forgotten about her embarrassment and revealed shock. However, Han Li turned a blind eye to the bottle and immediately turned his gaze. He instead walked towards the edge of the pond and lowered his head to look at the milky white water. Yuan Yao inwardly sighed and her expression returned to normal. However, her beautiful eyes glinted with a strange light as if she had thought of something. At that moment, Han Li suddenly thought of something and swept his hand across the surface of the pond. Han Li easily cupped some of the water into his hand and brought it towards his eye. The pond water was extreme fragrant and was filled with pure heaven-earth qi. But after a short moment, he saw the fragrant qi disappear from the water, turning back into regular water. Han Li's expression stirred. Han Li tossed the water away in his hand and said, "A spirit well spring. I truly didn't expect for the master of Heaven Void Hall to have placed such a large spirit well here. Could it be that Lady Yuan Yao had braved such great danger for that reason?" He then calmly turned his gaze towards her. At that moment, Yuan Yao had recovered her calm, but when she saw Han Li sweep his gaze past her bare shoulders, she couldn't help but lower her body and angrily reply, "Humph! Is that how fellow Taoist Han speaks to a woman? Could it be that you still haven't seen enough of my naked body?" Even with her beautiful face warped by anger, she still appeared quite graceful. She was truly the most outstanding beauty of a generation. As Han Li's gaze focused on the woman's appearance, his heart was set alight. Although he had managed to keep his mind clear and free of desires, he was still a man. Despite being uninterested in forcing any disgraceful and unbecoming acts, he couldn't help but feast his eyes on the beautiful scene before him and found himself wanting to make fun of her words. As Han Li sat at the edge of the water, he took off his boots and boldly stepped into the water. He leisurely teased, "If Lady Yuan wishes to wear clothes, please don't hesitate. I won't stop you in the slightest. However, if there is an opportunity to see such an amazing beauty, please don't expect me to act as a cultured gentleman. As such, I will be taking a look." With that said, Han Li smilingly stared at the blushing woman with chin in hand. Yuan Yao's face was scarlet. She thought to say something, but with a roll of her eyes, her beautiful face immediately returned to normal. With a charming smile, she chuckled and said, "He, I had believed fellow Taoists to be an uncultured brute without any understanding towards the fairer sex. I hadn't expected fellow Taoist Han to understand such charms. As a great kindness, I will allow you to enjoy the sight of this young woman's body for a moment." However, the sight of a naked body can't be considered much to us cultivators. Therefore, I will be coming out to put on some clothes. With that said, she shyly raised her hand from the water and lightly brushed her hair. She then seductively smiled at Han Li, revealing an amorous allure from her flawless beauty. Han Li's mind grew blank, as if he had been captivated by her. In that instant, Yuan Yao gracefully struck the water, causing a curtain of white mist to emerge in front of her, blocking her entirely from Han Li's sight. She took that opportunity to fly out of the water and shoot straight towards her clothes and items. A cloud of black qi then emerged from her body, blocking her once more from sight. Once the black qi disappeared, Yuan Yao was revealed to be fully dressed as she gently floated to the ground. At some unknown time, the long jade bottle from underneath the statue had disappeared.